Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 50, Power of Darkness and Bon Clay's Stand. Chapter 49, Power of Darkness and Bon Clay's Stand. Luffy and Ace. Both boys were lying flat on their backs after that last attack, panting for breath and so tired that they were having a hard time trying getting their bodies to move properly. "Hey, Ace," Luffy called as he looked up at the white clouds above him. "You give up yet?" "Funny, I was just about to ask the same thing," Ace retorted, pushing himself back up into a sitting position. "Damn, when do you become so tough? Who taught you to be this stubborn? Go ask yourself." Luffy laughed, still smiling as he breathed hard, not remembering the last time that he had this much fun. He started to laugh to himself before it slowly died out and he seemed focused on the blue sky once again, an odd emptiness inside him. "Alright, what's wrong now?" Ace said suddenly, noticing that Luffy seemed to be falling back into that grim mood again. "This is the last time that we're gonna fight, aren't we?" Luffy asked quietly. He remembered that was what Ace had said earlier about this being the very last battle that they will fight, the last time that they will test their strength against the other, and he didn't want it to ever end. "At least for a long time," Ace confirmed as he stretched out comfortably. "The next time that we meet up, there will be little doubt to me that you will be the stronger out of the two of us. I can't grow any stronger anymore, but you can only continue to grow stronger. So we might as well enjoy ourselves now before that day comes." "But," Luffy said softly, guilt once more taking over inside as he pushed himself up, looking at his big brother's face. Ace frowned. "You're ruining a fun fight," he warned. "Don't tell me you still feel guilty over what happened to me." Luffy didn't say anything as he looked away, but his face clearly said it all and Ace shook his head. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Ace asked, his tone sharp. "I thought you understood already. What happened to me wasn't your fault. When are you gonna just face that?" Luffy's eyes narrowed. "Because it was my fault. I couldn't move when that lava jerk was coming at me. And after everything you went through, are you surprised?" Ace demanded hotly. "If I went running after you guys instead of letting that lava jerk get to me, then we wouldn't be here, would we?" "Luffy, sometimes things just happen. We can't always be looking for someone to blame, even if it's ourselves. I don't blame you. Now stop talking like that or else it's just going to make my victory here suck." Now the distraction worked for a moment, for Luffy got to his feet, ready to go at him once again and even charged ahead with a loud battle cry, ready to show him what he thought of that comment. Ace got up as well, wondering just what he would have to do to get through Luffy's head that what he said was true. "Damn Luffy, why are you blaming yourself here?" He knew that Luffy had slowly come to grips over his death over the last 2 years, but there was still a part of Luffy's mind that seemed to still be haunted over that moment. Fine, if he had to beat it into Luffy's head for him to understand, then he would have to. This battle was going to end soon anyway, for he felt himself already being pushed to his limits here. This fight was almost over and he knew that they both sensed it, the weaker one will crumble first. And he sent his flames right at him, seeing the fire burning in both their eyes, determined to make a point. "Just living for one day was enough for me," he declared, glaring into Luffy's eyes. "And I'll be damned if I stood back and let you die without paying back the debt I already owe you." Straw Hats. Luffy still stood there, seething in rage as the Straw Hats watched the scene as if from the end of a large tunnel. Everything else around them seemed to have just faded out and all they were aware of was Luffy glaring wildly at Blackbeard, who thrashed on the ground, his giant belly breathing hard from that attack. "For someone who's supposed to be dangerous, he sure left himself wide open," Sanji said, wishing that Luffy would throw in another punch for Ace. "I think that he was just so proud of what he did to Ace that he just had to brag about it to someone," Zoro said, his eyes narrowed in silent fury, yet his hand was strangely steady as it gripped the sword. And when he saw Luffy there, he couldn't have wished for a better person to tell. That is sick, Nami said, her own hand tight fists as she remembered how Arlong used to torment her just like that. He would tell her how easy it was for him to kill her mother and he could just as easily do the same to her sister and the rest of her village. She remembered the surge of hatred for that monster and she knew the feeling of wanting nothing more than to break his face for what he said. So she understood Luffy's rage and him attacking Blackbeard very well, even hoping that he'll do it again. Robin was also frowning at Blackbeard, along with Frankie, both of them sharing a look with each other as they remembered the longing of wanting to hurt someone who hurt them all too well. In fact, they were both able to guess that they were thinking of the same person, Spanda. And they could recall just how good it felt to finally get some payback for what he had done. If nothing else, they hoped that that punch helped Luffy to feel better. But still, if he's so powerful, then that shouldn't have hurt him that much. Chopper said, looking up at Blackbeard who was pushing himself up, some blood already dripping down from his mouth. Surely someone who would soon be considered to be an emperor couldn't be hurt that easily. What's the deal? Something tells me that it's not that simple, Zoro said, though he couldn't help but wonder what was happening here. Luffy easily sent that bastard back a good 50 feet at least and sent him crashing into a wall. He had expected something fiercer from someone who could beat Ace. He should have at least been able to have seen it coming. Zoro was startled as the memory faded a little around them and they were looking around, wondering why it was disappearing right now. Luffy clearly didn't black out, and the battle looked like it was just getting started. But just then the memory reappeared and they winced at the bright light shining down at them. After being in the dark for so long that the sunlight was a little much for them at the moment. Wait, sunlight. They forced their eyes to blink through all the light to see that they were, indeed, outside in the open air once again. This time they were standing in the middle of a partially destroyed town, with bits of rubble and broken glass scattered here and there. What is this? Nami asked, startled by what was happening. Weren't we still on level 4 just a minute ago? How'd we get here? If I knew, I'd tell you, Zoro said, sounding just as lost as she did as Brook looked up at the bright sun and breathed out a sigh of relief. Though he couldn't really feel it, but to see the light and fresh air again after spending so much time in that dark prison felt like the first time he walked under the open sun after he had gotten his shadow back. He could never forget that moment, like he was breaking from heavy shackles and almost collapsed from the weight of freedom. I don't get it, why are we here? Where are we? Usopp asked in bafflement. How could the memory shift just like that? How'd they get outside so quickly? Robin frowned as she glanced around. Something tells me this isn't Luffy's memory anymore, she stated, and that was when she saw something move out of the corner of her eyes. She looked back and her eyes narrowed when she saw the group of men standing there. And it looks like I'm right. They all looked and spotted the group as well and Chopper cried out, Blackbeard. Doesn't look as fancy as before, Usopp said, looking at how the expensive-looking clothes that he had when he confronted Luffy were replaced by slightly worn-out-looking clothes. He was there with his crew, while a few unconscious men lay at their feet after having just been beaten up. Looks like he was the one terrorizing this town, Frankie guessed, seeing the masked muscle man behind them carrying a large sack of what had to be full of loot. If I had to guess, this seems to be. Robin began as they slowly approached the crew. But before she could finish speaking they heard Blackbeard laugh loudly at the newspaper that he was reading before he tossed it over to the man with the large sniper. By the time that they got to them, the tap-dancing mime tipped his hat as he spoke up. That's next to Water 7, yes. He said, I wonder if they hijacked a sea train to get there. That island isn't far from here, the sniper said in his deep voice. At this rate, we might meet them again. They all felt a cold spread throughout their bodies and a queasiness inside their stomachs at those words as they slowly realized where they were and what this was about. They were really coming for us? Sanji asked, his eyes widening as he gulped down. Which means, oh, hell no, Zoro moaned out, knowing just what this was about. This is Ace's memory, Brook croaked out, wishing that he didn't have to see this moment. There's nothing else that it could possibly be. No, Chopper said. It was bad enough knowing the truth why Ace fought Blackbeard, but now they had to see that. He covered his eyes, unable to look, though he could still hear Blackbeard's crew still talking.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
If fate is kind enough to place him in our sights, the sickly old man wheezed from the back of his feeble horse, we're obligated to pull the trigger, aren't we? He coughed before he seemed to fall asleep. Muscleman laughed wildly, punching the air as he cried out, what are we waiting for? Nothing. Blackbeard laughed. Let's go. And they watched as he kicked one of the unconscious men out of his way as they headed down the road, looking as if they were heading to the coast. We better cut them off before they leave, Blackbeard added to them all, or before the Navy gets to them first. I think we might have been better off with the Navy, Zoro said as he thought of Garp and how he had been there. Would it have been possible that his presence might have been enough to protect Luffy if Blackbeard did show up for him? Somehow, he doubted that. As much as he may care for his grandson, Garp knew that Luffy had chosen his own path and if he did end up in a fight with Blackbeard, there probably wasn't much he could do about it. Unless all of Water 7 was going to be destroyed, he couldn't see Garp stepping in to deal with Blackbeard himself. Besides, the old man had left Water 7 and hadn't returned until the day that they left. And apparently, Ace had been caught a couple days before that happened. What was the name of the island that Robin said? Barnero. So this must be it then. And his thoughts were proven true when they heard a familiar voice that stopped everyone in their tracks. Hey, hold on there a sec, Teach. We need to talk. No one wanted to look, but they felt almost compelled to do so as Blackbeard's gaze went up to one of the rooftops. Fire Fist Ace was there all right, but here he looked healthy and full of life, nothing like the beaten and half-dead form that they had seen back in level 6. In fact, it was almost startling at the difference, like Impel Down had sucked the very life and soul out of him, as if being imprisoned had robbed Ace of his will to live. Ace, Chopper said softly, as he watched Ace tipped his trademark orange hat up a little so that he could see Blackbeard, before he crossed his fingers in front of him, as if wondering what the best way would be for him to start shooting fire first. Oh, Blackbeard called out happily, as if an old friend had stopped by for an unexpected visit but was glad to see him anyway. What do you know? It's Commander Ace. You have no right to call me that anymore, Ace replied, a hint of coldness in his tone. Use that title with respect, or don't use it at all. I won't have you mock me. I gotta say, I like how he handles him, Frankie said, looking up sadly at Ace's calm demeanor. If it were me, I'd probably have started attacking him already. I guess he wants to see if he had any regret over what he did, Robin offered a guess with a shrug. What he? Brooke began before he looked away, remembering what she was talking about. That's right, Ace-san had been chasing after Blackbeard because he had killed a member of their crew, didn't he? His hands curled up into fists as he thought of it. How could anyone do that? Kill their own crewmate. No matter what the circumstances are, he couldn't stand the thought that someone you called a friend would turn around and kill you without a second thought. Just when he thought his hatred for Blackbeard couldn't get any worse. The man with the top hat walked forward, handling his cane lightly, yet was looking up at Ace with great interest as he said, "So, this is the infamous Fire Fist Ace." "Yep," Ace answered, "that's me. You guessed it." That was when Ace glanced over them all with a critical eye, as if trying to detect any threats from them before he looked back at Blackbeard and added, "So this is your crew. Looks like you've become a captain now, huh? Captain Marshall D. Teach, of the Blackbeard Pirates. So that's his real name?" Chopper asked with a blink. "Yes," Robin said, but she was disturbed by that. Blackbeard also had the D in his name as well, yet why was he so different than from every other D initial that she had ever known? Not one of the few that she did know had ever betrayed a friend like that. What does this all mean? Blackbeard, however, was laughing again. "Come on, Ace, lighten up. It's good to see ya again. What brings you here? You weren't looking for me, were ya? What does that moron think?" Nami demanded bitterly. Why else would he be here if not to find him? "Oh, I'm sure he knows," Robin commented. "He's just playing around here." Ace seemed to realize that as well, for he smirked suddenly and cracked his knuckles. "Let's stop beating around the bush here, huh?" he asked, suddenly all business. "Even if you play dumb, I know you're a crafty bastard. There's only one reason for me to be here, and you know what it is. So spare me the chit-chat." They could tell from the look on Blackbeard's face that he knew just what this was about and seemed to realize that there was no more reason for him to be acting innocent. "Fine," he said, "have it your way. But there's one question I'd like to ask first." They were all a little apprehensive about this, one question, and they knew that they weren't going to like it at all. They were right. "Instead of fighting, how about you become a member of my crew?" Blackbeard asked. They all felt sick at the question. Did Blackbeard really think that someone like Ace would ever agree to join him after he jumped ship the way that he did? He must have been out of his mind. As for Ace, he didn't react at all as he glared down at him darkly. They could see in his face that he wasn't the least bit interested, but was at least humoring him about letting him say his piece. Blackbeard didn't disappoint them as he then began to blurt out what he was going to do. "I have the perfect plan to rise to the top," he called out. "If you stick with me, I swear we can rule the world. Whitebeard's days are over and you know it. I'm gonna be king of the pirates." Why do I feel really ticked off when he says that? Frankie growled angrily. Maybe because he stole Luffy's line. Sanji offered darkly, knowing the feeling. Now, he knew that there were plenty of people out there who said the same thing, each one with a dream of finding the One Piece, and that was fine. He knew that they all had to work for the right to claim that prize, and he welcomed it, but hearing Blackbeard say that, it made him feel sick to his stomach. But what made him feel even worse, what made them all feel like a grave blow, was what Blackbeard said next, confirming the fears that they had before. "First, I'm heading off to Water 7 to kill Straw Hat Luffy as a special gift to the world government. Wouldn't hurt to have you along for the fun," he boasted before he laughed. There was silence all around the Straw Hats as the truth came out. So it was all true. Blackbeard's true target from the start wasn't Ace, but Luffy. After hearing about Crocodile getting demoted from a warlord and then seeing Luffy's sudden huge increase in a bounty, he must have put two and two together. That was why he went after Luffy in the first place until they were lucky enough to escape to Sky Island. They probably thought that had been the end of it until Eni's lobby. Of course, he saw it in the newspaper and knew that it wasn't going to be much longer before Luffy's next bounty came out. He wanted to go after Luffy and turn him into the world government so that he could be made into a warlord. And after all the problems that Luffy had given to the world government at that point, it wouldn't have been difficult at all for him to get that request. "Oh, God," Nami said, covering her mouth and not knowing if she should start crying or throw up from this. She knew that feeling all too well also, her mother had stepped in and sacrificed herself to protect her and Nojiko. Even if she knew that it was only going to cost her life, she did it anyway. Poor Luffy, why didn't he ever mention this before? She could only imagine the hurt that must have been in him when he found out the truth. For the first time in this memory, Ace was taken off his guard at the mention of Luffy's name, and though he had regained his composure quickly enough, there was a new fire of determination in his eyes. "Luffy, huh?" he asked as if he was just making sure he heard right, and that was when ferocity appeared. "You're out of your mind." "Oh," Blackbeard asked, sounding surprised by his reaction, "you know him?" "Of course I know him, you sack of crap," he called back, and he sounded angry. "I'm not gonna let you lay a hand on my little brother." "You tell him, Ace." Usopp cried out, while trying hard not to start crying again and rubbed his eyes so hard that his vision was blurred. Blackbeard looked stunned by those words, having never have guessed that he and Luffy were actually brothers. "And I'm not joining your crew," Ace added with venom. "You can take your little offer and shove it up your..." Unfortunately, they didn't get a chance to finish hearing what Ace was going to say, for the man with the sniper had took aim and fired. It happened so fast that they almost missed seeing it. But it ended up going right through Ace, like how those bullets went through Crocodile when they confronted those guards. Fire licked Ace's body as he sighed. "Well, you get it." "Yeah, I think we all did," Frankie said as Blackbeard actually glared back at the sniper angrily, looking like he was about to tell him off for that. But then the fire burned Ace's body and the holes closed up, not leaving a mark. "Looks like you need to teach your crew some manners, Captain," Ace smirked as he stood up and held up his fingers like they were pistols and began to fire little bullets of fire. Fire gun. The sniper had no choice but to run as a trail of fire followed in his wake. But at that moment, the masked muscleman leapt up behind Ace and actually threw a whole building right at him. Chopper gasped at that and cried out a warning to him, but Ace could take care of himself, having already seen it. He surrounded himself with a pillar of fire before launching it right up and through the building until it shattered and there were flaming bits of wood fell everywhere. Awesome. Chopper and Usopp gasped at the battle. It only just started, but Ace was taking them all on at once. "You don't become the 2nd Division commander for nothing," Zoro stated casually. "Makes you wonder how strong the 1st Division commander is," Brook said, as he looked to Robin and asked, "Do you know who that is, Robin-san?" "I've heard of him," Robin answered as she watched the flaming debris fall. "Apparently he was Whitebeard's right-hand man. From what I've heard, after Whitebeard died, his armada of a crew ended up breaking up into several smaller crews. I assume that he took over his 1st Division as the new captain of the Whitebeard Pirates." Usopp wasn't paying much attention to that talk as he looked back to the sniper who still looked ready to start firing again, and Usopp could tell that he was a pretty good shot. Apparently Zoro noticed this and looked over at Usopp. "I have a feeling that we may end up running into this crew again before this is all over," he said, "and I think it's safe to say that we'll leave that guy to you." "Me?" Usopp asked in surprise. "Who else?" Zoro smirked. "As for me, haven't really seen anyone that I'm that interested in fighting yet. Aside from Blackbeard, but after what he did to Ace I think that Luffy deserves the chance to deal with him." "Right," Usopp said, frowning over at that sniper guy, and made a silent promise that he was going to prove just who deserved to be the sniper on the ship of the Pirate King. As for Blackbeard, he stepped away from the burning pieces before he turned and barked at the others that they had to stay out of this fight. Until they got stronger, Ace was out of their league. But Ace took them all by surprise by using his signature, Fire Fist, and aiming the flames at them. "Dirty, but effect," Frankie said, thoroughly glad to see that pompous jerk knock down a few pegs. They were fired right through another building with a crash, and soon Blackbeard was thrashing on the ground as fire began to smoke his body. His crew ran to him, trying to put the fire out as Ace jumped down and walked calmly through the fire towards them. It was impressive to see the fire slowly leave the wood as it was drawn to Ace's smoldering body like a magnet.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Blackbeard pushed his men off him and glared at Ace as the fire died down. "That Ace was something else," Robin said, shaking her head with a smile. "Talk about a flaming personality," Frankie laughed, but stopped when he heard Blackbeard chuckling darkly under his breath as he rolled over onto his face. It gave him a bad feeling. "Alrighty, I get it," Blackbeard said, pushing himself up. "You wanna finish me, don't ya? The murder of a crewmate is a serious crime after all." "Of course it is," Brook yelled angrily. "He doesn't feel any guilt over killing a friend," Chopper said, his eyes wide. "Does he look remorseful to you?" Sanji asked coldly. Not only that, he turned Ace, another previous friend, as well as his former commander, over to prison without any problem at all. This heartless piece of shit doesn't deserve to live. Those thoughts seemed to be confirmed as Blackbeard looked up and cried out, and yes, I killed 4th Division Commander Thatch with my own 2 hands. But there wasn't any other choice. It wasn't personal. It's just that he had the devil fruit I've been searching for. You mean he killed his friend over a devil fruit? Usopp yelled out in shock. I had a feeling that it might have been over something like that, Robin said with a frown. Whitebeard was considered to be the most powerful man in the world, and to kill someone on his ship meant nothing short of a death sentence. Blackbeard, as a former member of Whitebeard's crew, would have known that better than anyone. And she was sure that he wouldn't have dared risk Whitebeard's wrath unless he had some kind of insurance. She had thought about it, and the most reasonable answer would be that he killed that commander for something big. So it was a devil fruit after all. You know the rules on Whitebeard's ship. Blackbeard went on, whoever finds one of those gets to eat it. Really? Nami asked, blinking in surprise. Sounds fair to me, Zoro said with a shrug, finders, keepers so to speak. Yes, Brook nodded, remembering that had been a rule on his old ship as well and how he ended up getting his own devil fruit because of that. But still, was it truly worth having blood on your hands? I've memorized all the shapes and colors of all the devil fruits that they discovered, so I knew that was the one I needed. Blackbeard went on, whether I liked it or not, I spent decades on Whitebeard's ship because it was the one best chance I had to finding that single fruit. But just when I thought there was no hope left, there it was, right in the hand of my friend. He spent decades on that ship just for a chance he might end up finding that one fruit. Frankie asked, and he gave all that up just like that. Just what the hell is this fruit? Nami frowned worriedly. Looks like we're gonna find out, she said. Zoro's eye narrowed dangerously as he looked at Blackbeard. And he had a bad feeling that it was the reason that Ace ended up losing this fight. Whatever it was, it had to be dangerous. Then you murdered him in cold blood and stole it, Ace summed up, a hint of disgust there. Without a second thought. He didn't have to go that far, did he? Usopp asked, shaking his head. Couldn't he have just stolen the fruit? Unless this Thatch had already eaten it, Robin said. The only way to turn it back into an edible fruit is if that devil fruit user dies. That ability will then regenerate inside another existing fruit. Blackbeard only smiled back, showing that he had no shame or guilt over what he had done. Bad luck for him, he said as he slowly got up. But there's no other way. This ability has chosen me. He then laughed more wildly than ever before, his smile so great that it was almost breaking his face in half. And its power has made me the strongest man in the world. Talk about ego, Zoro said, thinking of Eneru and how he had actually thought that he had become a god. Well, they got him in the end, didn't they? That proves that it doesn't matter how strong your ability is, you can still be taken out. He watched as Blackbeard held up a hand and declared, watch. Even among the Logia fruits, there's nothing quite like it. And they watched as something dark began to seep from his body and rise up into the air like smoke. It was pitch black, darker than even one of Nami's thunderclouds, it gave them the creeps looking at it. Suddenly it burst out at him all at once before it became a wild twister and rose up high into the sky, as if hoping that it could block out the sun. What is that? Usopp gasped as Brook fell backwards onto his butt and stared up in horror at it as Blackbeard only laughed louder than ever. Ace, your body's made of fire, right? He asked sinisterly. My body is darkness. Darkness. The Straw Hats all repeated with Ace, though when Ace said it, it was slower, calmer than the rest of them. I've heard of this one, Robin said, and even she looked unnerved by it. They call it an unnatural fruit among all the other Logia types. Unnatural. What's that mean? Nami asked at once. All other Logia devil fruits are divided into one of two bases, she answered. Matter, such as sand or ice, or energy such as electricity and light. This is the one fruit out all of them that doesn't have either. So what does it do? Frankie asked, looking up. Other than make it dark, I mean. You'll see soon enough, Commander Ace, Blackbeard chuckled. I think you'll want to reconsider my offer. In the history of the devil fruits, this one's supposed to be the most dangerous one of them all. The Logia dark fruit power. In other words, have become a darkness man. I'll give you a taste of its power. I wouldn't blink if I were you. At least he's not short on confidence, Sanji offered, hoping that he broke his hand patting himself on the back. Ace smirked, unimpressed. Quit yapping and just do it. Where are they going? Brook pointed out and they glanced back in time to see that Blackbeard's men all turned and were running from the area as fast as they could. With the muscle man and the sniper, whom Blackbeard called Burgess and Van Augur, dragging the old man and the horse away with them. That can't be a good sign, Nami gulped nervously as the whirlwind of darkness was pulled back down to Blackbeard before he cast it across the ground like a monstrous shadow. Some of the Straw Hats screamed, trying to get their feet off the ground as it swarmed around them as how a flood would do, not that those who didn't panic didn't blame them. It craped across the ground and was as pitch black as a bottomless hole. Darkness is gravity. Blackbeard cried out, it pulls everything in it. Even light can't escape. Its power is infinite. So then why isn't it working on Ace? Frankie demanded, and he was right, for the darkness seemed to be going everywhere except for Ace. Ace noticed this as well as he looked around to see that the pile of rubble that he was standing on was freed from the fog and even began to taunt Blackbeard that he might not have any control of it. Blackbeard didn't look the least bit concerned as he answered that he wasn't after him just yet, instead he was going to test it out on the town itself. That was when they watched in horror as the darkness that he had cast all over him was now slowly sucking the buildings in. Everything that the darkness touched was pulling it inside it, crumbling up like tin foil until it disappeared down that pit. What's happening? Nami cried out as she watched a covered wagon fold up as if she crumbled a sheet of paper before pulled under the waves of fog. But it was Blackbeard who answered. Within these shadows lies the power to compress anything and everything, he boasted, to crush whatever they touch. So that's it, Zoro said, looking around as the buildings all shrank and cracked, actually sucking down the town like it was going down the drain. In a matter of minutes, the town was gone, as if it had never been there before, leaving only dirt behind as the darkness slowly made its way back to Blackbeard. This is the power of darkness, Robin said softly, her face the only one that remained unchanged as they stared around them. It is like a black hole, it's like he said. Even light can't hope to escape from it if it's caught inside. Still. That's nothing special. Chopper gasped out, though they heard the fear in his voice as they looked at the rubble that Ace was still standing on, the only evidence of there ever having been a town at all. That's just the beginning. Blackbeard cried out, now I'll show you what happened to that town. Or what's left of it I should say. And then he stood tall as the dark cloud burst from him and out came broken boards and bricks, just shattered pieces of rubble and wrecked buildings pouring out of the darkness, defying all logic as it emptied itself. Soon they were all surrounded by the giant splinters of all that remained of this island's town. Now that is something you don't see every day, Zoro said, torn between being impressed and fighting not to show it. Congratulations. You can become a giant garbage bag. Big deal. Frankie yelled, though he had to admit that it did one hell of a job here. Blackbeard only laughed, like how a child would when they knocked over their tower of blocks. So do you get it now, Ace? This was what I was willing to kill a friend for. Like that kind of destruction justifies killing someone you called a friend. Brooke shouted in outrage, wishing that he could strike him down just for saying that. He was sure that this Thatch person was rolling in his grave at those words. He was so angry that he didn't notice the small greenish lights that fluttered around Blackbeard like little fireflies at first. He looked up and realized that it all came from Ace's hands, and then he caused them to burst right into flames and they engulfed Blackbeard with fire. What happened? Sanji asked in confusion. He was a Logia type, wasn't he? So why didn't he just turn into darkness and avoid that attack? Normally it takes a lot of concentration for a Logia to turn into their element so that they don't need to dodge an attack, Robin said, having studied Crocodile's abilities long and hard should she be forced to betray him. With enough practice, it becomes instinct and they're able to phase into that state without problem. But like I said before, darkness isn't a matter or an energy. And because of that, Blackbeard can't do this. Wait, so, he can't just become darkness and let an attack go through him? Usopp asked. Then, why? The darkness part 1 get, but this? Ace said before he smirked a little in confusion. What's going on here? You're a Logia type, so that shouldn't hurt you, right? Or rather it shouldn't even hit you. Blackbeard only yelled on, trying to put out the fire before the darkness sucked it all away, leaving his belly burnt and crispy. Blackbeard gasped in relief that it was out as he slowly pushed himself back up. I already told you, he hissed, my darkness swallows everything around it. Whether it's punches, blades, lightning or fire. Unlike you, I can't just turn into an element to dodge an attack. And the pain I absorb when I get hit is much greater than a normal human feels. Wait, so it hurts more than when someone who doesn't have devil fruit powers would feel. Why would he want that? Nami asked as she thought of powers like Eneru and Aokiji. You would think that Blackbeard would have wanted powers like that instead of this. But Blackbeard only smiled wider as he stood up. But the trade-up for that inconvenience is more than worth it. Because there happens to be one other thing I can absorb. He then held up his hand and a dark wind seemed to pull Ace towards him. Ace tried to stand his ground, but the gravity was too great and suddenly he was sent flying at Blackbeard, his orange hat soaring off his head as he grabbed Ace's arm. The Straw Hat's eyes widened as they saw Blackbeard hold onto Ace there, suddenly understanding as Blackbeard grinned. You're smart, he said, have you figured it out yet? Huh, Ace's eyes widened in shock, it can't be. He cried out as Blackbeard grinned wider and rammed his fist right into Ace's gut. Blood burst from Ace's mouth as he was sent flying backwards crashing into one of the smashed buildings and didn't move as Blackbeard cackled. He grabbed him. Chopper cried out, so he can use Haki. Usopp asked in terror, knowing that Ace's powers weren't going to help here. No, that wasn't Haki, Zoro countered at once. As soon as he touched Ace. He touched his true body, Robin said, gritting her teeth. I see now. Darkness can pull things in. Including other devil fruit powers. You mean like with Sea Prism Stone? Nami asked at once. Unlike with Sea Prism Stone, or even falling into the sea, it doesn't rob them of their strength, Robin said, looking hard at the fog. He is now able to attack a devil fruit user as if they never had their powers to being with. We are normal human beings if he touches us. They all stared at her before staring back at Blackbeard, who was grinning wider than ever at seeing Ace knocked down. However, Robin added, it seems that ability can only work if he touches us. So you have to attack him from a distance, and if your attacks are able to get through, then he has to take a lot more damage than normal, Nami summed up for them all. That seems to be the answer, Robin answered, but she still looked concerned. However, if he's able to draw a person into him like a black hole, it's going to make avoiding him a lot more complicated, Frankie said, getting what she was saying. Yeah, well, if you don't have a devil fruit power, then that sorta defeats the purpose, Zoro said with a frown. If Luffy even wanted a chance to beat this guy, then he was going to have to think of some pretty creative ways to get around that. But even though fighting with his powers won't be much help, Luffy still has his raw strength, and it was a good thing that darkness didn't make him weak and take that away from him like with the sea. But that concerned him because Ace was already strong with the powers of the flame fruit. Yet that wasn't enough to stop him. He glanced back to see Ace trying to get up, but ended up slipping and slid down to the ground, actually spitting up blood. They watched as he reached up to his mouth and pulled his fingers away to stare at the blood that dripped there. It's been so long since you've been hit, I bet it hurts, Ace, Blackbeard sneered. But you understand now. You understood the second I grabbed you. Not only can my darkness pull you in, it can also absorb your devil fruit power. And that's what makes having a Logia so vulnerable, Robin went on. They become so used to not having to dodge an attack that if they are in a situation like this. But Ace isn't like most Logia types, Usopp said at once. That's true, she nodded. I can see that. For most devil fruit users, they would be rendered helpless if their powers were taken away from them. This isn't the case with Ace. His powers aren't a crutch for him, they enhance his strength. There was still a chance that he could end up winning, but there wasn't any point hoping for a win here because they already knew the outcome. That was what made it hard to watch. Still, Ace was able to push himself up onto one leg as Blackbeard went on to explain his powers. In other words, as long as you're in contact with me, someone with devil fruit powers is no different than a regular person. He laughed. Logia, Zone, Paramesha, all those with devil fruit powers who have become dependent on them are in for a surprise. One little touch will remind them how weak they really are. For someone who thinks like that, he's sure convinced that his powers are the strongest out of all the others, Sanji spat. Yes, he's grown to be very cocky, that will come back to bite him in the end, Nami said firmly. Nonetheless, the problem was that she could see that he had the power to back up his threats until then. Ace stood tall as he wiped some of the blood away and said, then all I have to do is avoid you. If you think you can escape gravity that easily, then I'd like to see you try. Blackbeard said, as he used his black vortex and pulled Ace towards him a second time. But Ace was more prepared for this, and he held his hands up as he sent two flaming spears at him, both piercing Blackbeard's chest just as he ended up slugging Ace's face. For the second time, Ace was sent flying back into some rubble, crashing through, but it was Blackbeard who was screaming in agony as he tried to pull out the fire spikes. The Straw Hats couldn't care less about him as they ran over to check on Ace, who had pulled himself out of the rubble, his hand holding onto his neck before he glared back at Blackbeard. That bastard almost broke my neck. They heard him hiss. His ability is gonna be a bigger pain than I thought. Could he have? Chopper asked as he bent down to check Ace's neck. No, there wasn't anything wrong, but it looked like that if he was hit any harder then it could have been very different. Yes, because without his normal powers to protect him, every hit is like hitting a normal human, Robin reminded him. If it's strong enough, I'd say that it is a good chance that Blackbeard could end up breaking his neck, or worse. Don't say stuff like that. Usopp barked as Ace held up his fingers in a cross shape before sending more fire right at him. The battle went on between the two of them actually knocking right over a mountain in the process. It was amazing, and horrifying, to watch as neither enemy gave in or made any ground. It looked like it could have gone on for hours, but the battle was clearly taking its toll on them both as fire and darkness clashed with each other. None of them could dare to utter a word as they watched the two give it their all until, finally, both of them were gasping for breath, beaten and bloody. But out of the two of them, it was Ace who was on his hands and knees as Blackbeard panted hard like a dog. This fight could have gone either way, Brook whispered. If only Ace was a little bit. It's not over yet, Zoro said, his hand gripping his sword again. And if Ace is even half as stubborn as Luffy then he won't give up that easily, Sanji said knowingly as he dropped his cigarette and went for another one, actually opening up another pack once he realized that he had gone through another box. Everything falls before darkness, Blackbeard said, even you can struggle only so long. Still, finishing you off here would be a waste of your talent. Don't fight it, Ace. Join me. All of them felt anger boiling in them at Blackbeard's gall to ask such a thing. After all that he had done, after seeing what kind of a person that he truly was, he really thought that Ace would be willing to join him. Did he really think that Ace could turn his back on his crew, on his little brother who he had dedicated most of his life to trying to protect? And Ace proved their thoughts as he tried to push himself up. He slipped slightly, his head pressed against the ground as he tried to catch his breath. But he was able to push himself up so that they could see his face. There was blood dripping down the side of his head, but he was still smiling, a smile that they weren't sure they were glad to see there. "If I surrender to you," he said, still calm and grinning, "then I can never call myself a man again. I won't submit and I won't live with regrets no matter what." "You got that, stupid." "What a man," Frankie said in awe. Even though he knows that he could die, he won't back down. "He's right though," Zoro said, looking at Ace with great respect. If he did surrender, he'd never be able to live with himself for that. He shut his one eye as he thought grimly, because he still had something to protect. And he wasn't going to let Blackbeard take that away from him. Blackbeard looked surprised that he refused his offer after experiencing what he could, but the smile there showed that he seemed to understand that it could no longer be helped. "Once you die your morals are useless," he said. "I'm sorry you can't understand that, Ace." He held up his hands as the darkness spread. "Let darkness take you." "Great flame commandment," Ace cried as he spread his fire wide. And their eyes widened as the fire grew greater and hotter until it looked like he was holding the sun right in his hands over his head. "Cool," Frankie whispered. Blackbeard roared with laughter. "The sun against darkness, huh? Only one can win." Ace just smiled back. "I'll make Whitebeard the king, or die trying." The darkness and the fire went at each other, the impact so great that it shook the entire island and the memory around them before everything went dark. "What happened?" Chopper cried, trying to make something out. "Simple," Sanji said, his eyes shutting as some of the others lowered their heads sadly. "Ace, lost." The memory blacked out, Nami whispered, tears forming a little. "He used all his strength, but I guess." The memory suddenly phased back in and that took them all by surprise. At least until they saw the blurred and shifting scene around them. It was like when Luffy was poisoned by Magellan and could no longer see straight, but they could see enough. Ace was on the ground, covered in blood and no longer moving as Blackbeard staggered towards him. The battle clearly took its toll on him since they could see that he was bleeding heavily and covered in burns. But he was still on his feet. "Ace, get up. He's coming." Usopp tried to yell to Ace, actually looking like he was about to run over and grab him until Zoro put a hand on his shoulder and he stopped in his tracks, remembering where he was. Ace struggled to move, rolling his head as blood poured out of his mouth, the memory blinking in and out. He was just barely conscious, and seeing that tired, but smug smile, on Blackbeard's face seemed to make it worse. Fire Fist Ace was beaten, and yet he still glared up at Blackbeard without any signs of fear, refusing to surrender to him. "You should have taken me up on my offer, Ace," Blackbeard laughed darkly, as he panted for air. "You would have made a valuable member, the second under, the new Pirate King." "Like hell, I would have let that happen," Ace replied in a weak voice, spitting out a mouthful of blood right at Blackbeard's feet. "Hey, if I had known that Straw Hat was your kid brother from the start, it would have made it a lot more interesting," Blackbeard smirked. "It's nothing personal, Ace. But he seemed like the perfect choice for my plans. You know, I should have guessed from the start that he was your brother when I first met him." "What the hell are you?" Ace tried to spit out as he struggled to breathe. "Does he have to do this?" Nami demanded furiously. "Beating him is one thing, but to mock him like this." "The winner can do whatever he wants," Zoro hissed, though he looked furious as well. Even after all that's happened, he's still taunting Ace with Luffy's life. Blackbeard only chuckled more. "Yeah, I did end up meeting your little brother, after all. He was right there in front of me, practically on a silver platter. Course, I didn't realize what kind of bounty he had until later on, and when I went after him, he got away from me. I knew that he'd show up again if I waited around and I was right. He's at Water 7, right now. And if I had gone like I planned, that kid's bounty would have been as good as mine." He looked back and smirked. "In fact, I could still go after him right now." "Like hell," Zoro growled, almost pulling out his sword to attack. They all had anger in their faces, looking like they wanted nothing more than to get up and strike as well. But none of them had more anger than Ace. Fury rose in his face as he tried to get up, he even seemed to ignore his injuries as he forced his wounded body up. But Blackbeard slammed his boot down on top of Ace's head, stomping him right back into the ground. "Don't worry, Commander, there's no need for me to go after him anymore," he said as he smiled wider. "You have just given me an even greater prize to hand over to the government." "And that was where he really went as low as you could possibly get," Sanji said in disgust as the memory faded with Blackbeard's echoing laugh. He turned Ace over to the government. His former commander, and he did it without a second thought. "What scum," Frankie growled, wanting nothing more than to slug that guy. He remembered when Tom was taken away from him by Spanda and how good it felt to finally get some payback for what he did. He didn't know what he could do, but if he could someday help Luffy fulfill that desire for revenge, he was going to. After all, it was thanks to Luffy that he was able to finally fulfill a dream of permanently ruining Spanda's face. Usopp looked down at the ground grimly and Zoro noticed this as he asked, angry as well. "Well, yes," Usopp said, and they were surprised to see that he sounded remorseful. "But I also feel guilty." "For what?" Brook asked. "It was all Blackbeard who did all this. We shouldn't have to. I know, Usopp sighed tiredly as he looked up and stared around at the darkness. More than anything, I'm grateful to Ace stepping in when he did. I feel guilty that I'm just relieved that Luffy-san was spared having to fight him from before. What? Chopper asked in amazement. You're glad that Blackbeard and Ace fought with each other. I know that it is selfish, he said, shaking his head. And I truly feel terrible for what happened to Ace-san after he fought his hardest out here. But, I can't help but feel so glad that Blackbeard gave up coming after Luffy in the end. They all looked at each other, and they had to admit that they could see where he was coming from. They all hated how Ace fought with Blackbeard and how he was defeated in the end, but yes, they were grateful that someone as deadly as Blackbeard didn't come after Luffy like that. And they hated themselves for even thinking that. Do you think we should tell Luffy about this? Nami asked timidly. About how Ace? He already knows this, doesn't he? Frankie asked bitterly. Yes, she said, but I think he needs to know just how much that Ace was willing to protect him. It might help him, maybe. And it could just make things worse, Sanji offered, not having the slightest clue as to how he would feel if he was in Luffy's shoes. It could just make him feel all the more guilty. We'll worry about that later, Robin said softly as the memory came back and they were right back where they left off with Luffy versus Blackbeard before. Blackbeard had just pushed himself up to his feet, and he was even bleeding a little as Luffy glared furiously up at him. Oh, no, Usopp said, going pale and his eyes widening. Luffy doesn't know about his powers, Zoro finished with his teeth grinding together. This wasn't going to end well, and it seemed to be proven true when Blackbeard started to grate that darkness from his body once again, and Usopp even tried to warn Luffy to get away from it, but it was too late. Blackbeard used his black vortex and sucked Luffy right up and he was caught just like how Ace had been the first time. As soon as Blackbeard grabbed hold of him, Luffy's second gear suddenly faded away and his eyes widened in shock before Blackbeard smiled evilly at him. Luffy, Usopp, Chopper, Brook, and Nami all screamed out just as Blackbeard slammed Luffy right into the floor, cracking it apart and blood went flying. But this attack hurt him a lot more than what it normally did, as he began to scream in agony, actually rolling around on the floor as they saw the blood. Like before, it cancels out Luffy's powers, Sanji said, biting down so hard that his broke his cigarette right in half. When Blackbeard touched him, for that brief moment, Luffy's body was no different than any of ours, Robin said seriously. And since that's what protects him from blunt attacks, he would feel the pain much more than normal. Why did his second gear disappear though? Brook asked in confusion. The only reason that Luffy's able to handle his second gear is because of his rubber body, Chopper said. It's like what Lucci said. It's because his organs are all made of rubber that he's able to stay in that form. But if he's not made of rubber, even for a second, then his body can't keep that form up, Nami said as Luffy jumped away, regaining control of himself as the crowd behind them all looked just as confused as to what happened here. The side of Luffy's head was bleeding badly and he reached up to stare at in bafflement as his second gear suddenly returned. Blood, Luffy whispered as he wiped his face. At the look on his face, Blackbeard started to laugh again. I can tell by the look on your face that you have no idea what just happened. He taunted, your brother had the exact same expression and that's how I won against him. You get it yet? Devil fruit powers are useless against me. Their powers, maybe, Sanji said, but not everyone needs to hide behind their powers to fight. Fight without it and you'll have a chance. But Robin was frowning. That might be more difficult than they realize if some of the rumors she's heard about Blackbeard are true. She didn't see how it was possible though, despite all that she heard, how can someone have the power of 2 devil fruits? And so what? Luffy suddenly shouted at Blackbeard, pushing himself back up. He ran in to attack Blackbeard again, but to their surprise, it was Jinbei who had come running out of nowhere with surprising speed and grabbed hold of him so that he stopped in his tracks. Thank goodness, Nami gasped in relief. As much as she wanted to see Luffy crush Blackbeard here, the sad fact was that she knew that he didn't stand a chance just yet. Besides, she knew that now wasn't the time to be thinking about fighting. Wait, Luffy-kun, stop. Jinbei yelled as Luffy struggled in his grasp, screaming at him to let him go already. This isn't the time. You must endure it. What is most important here? His eyes went to the side as he glared back at Blackbeard, who was panting slightly. Ever since he was on Whitebeard's ship, no one has ever known his true nature. I do not know what tricks he used, but he was strong enough to defeat even Ace. We cannot afford to waste time and energy here. If you get carried away and fight him now then we will not have time to save Ace. The Straw Hats knew that was the only thing that could get Luffy to calm down enough to think things through. He knew that Jinbei was right, but the fact that he was forced to walk away from the bastard responsible for all this clouded his better judgment. Jinbei knew that if they wanted to even have a slim chance of saving Ace, they would have to put their priorities over everything else here and walk away from this fight, for now. Right now, Luffy needed to remember that Ace's safety was the most important thing here and that avenging his brother's loss wasn't going to help anything. Luffy still looked angry but he breathed hard as he slowly calmed down and faded his second gear so that he returned to normal. But it was hard to remember that when they heard Blackbeard laughing again. You're even stronger than I had thought you'd be, he admitted. Your hockey has increased too. Well, he's grown a lot since we ran into you at Mock Town, Usopp said firmly. Crocodile folded his arms as he looked down at Blackbeard. Speaking up, you said you're Blackbeard, right? I've heard that there was some no-name pirate from Whitebeard's crew who had took my place among the warlords. However, why would someone who had been called to Marine headquarters bother to come all the way down here? You're pretty much throwing away the title that you wanted so badly. It was all part of my plan right from the very start. He boasted. And I'm not obligated to have to tell you anything, Crocodile. He was curious, Robin said calmly, nothing more. Fair enough, Crocodile said, and he already sounded bored as he added, to be honest, I didn't really care. Pretty touchy, aren't you? Blackbeard mused. Stop talking already and get out of there. Frankie yelled, knowing that they were wasting more time than ever, practically begging Magellan to hurry and catch up to them. While at that moment they heard a loud explosion which snapped them all back to their problem and how time was of the essence. What's that? Bon Clay cried out, looking behind them to where they heard the blast. That was when they heard someone cry out, Magellan is almost here. Crap, Sanji said, sweat starting to fall again. If they wanna keep living, then they have to keep moving now before he gets here. This is not good, Eva, still in his woman form, called out and she stood tall as she addressed Luffy, Straw Hat Boy. Hurry up and get going. If you're hit by any more poison then I won't be able to save you a second time. He's right, Chopper said, shaking his head. Luffy's really messed up his body here. If it wasn't for that shot that he gave him, then he wouldn't even be standing right now. As the rest of their mob heard Magellan's name, they all began to run for the stairs. The Straw Hats were actually wondering if Blackbeard and his crew would stop them, but instead, he just let them go. They had clearly come here for another reason and weren't interested in wasting their energy here fighting. But seeing that cocky smile on his face was almost too much for them. It seemed to be too much for Luffy as well, but he seemed to be holding on to what Jinbei had said and made Ace's life his one focus again. But he still ended up glaring fiercely at Blackbeard, so that they knew that should they meet again, he wasn't going to be as lucky. Jinbei gave Blackbeard an identical glare of hatred as he said, since you took out all the guards that were blocking the staircase that makes things easier for us. Not that they'll be giving him a thanks anytime soon, Frankie added as Blackbeard laughed once again. Well, he admitted, you guys ended up helping us out too. All this panic is convenient for us as well. I'm definitely going to save Ace. Luffy yelled, and those words seemed to make things more painful than they already were. That had to make Blackbeard's sting here all the worse for Luffy and they wanted to do something, anything, to help their captain. Even though they knew that nothing could ever bring Ace back, even if they defeated Blackbeard, Ace was dead and that was the sad truth. But they were, at least, going to make sure that Blackbeard regretted ever being born. Sure, Blackbeard smirked. I won't say it's pointless. After all, there's no such thing as impossible in this world. Through sheer will, Luffy walked right past him, his head held high, but anger still written all over his face. Sky Island did exist, didn't it? Blackbeard suddenly stated and his words stopped Luffy there as the Straw Hats all glared back at him. One Piece is the same. It definitely exists. With one final laugh, he walked on with his crew, heading deeper into Impel down to the doors that led to level 5. Something tells me that we'll see you all again. In fact, just a few hours, we'll give you all a show that's gonna shake this world to the core. What's he talking about here now? Nami demanded. He was all up for mocking both Luffy and Ace before he goes around and tells him that. What's his deal? I have no idea, Zoro said, shaking his head. But it doesn't matter what he says here. We will fight him again someday over the One Piece. I bet my sword's on it. And when we do, he's history, Frankie agreed, punching his fists together so that there was a loud clunking noise. The only question here is which one of these bastards is gonna be the poor loser that I take out. So long as I can get the strongest one other than Blackbeard, Zoro told him, pulling his blade out a little so that they could see the shine of steel. Luffy deserves that much from us. To let him avenge his brother's death. I agree, Brook nodded, also silently vowing to do whatever it took to help Luffy fight them. Jinbei didn't say much else as he told Luffy that they must get going, that they will not bother with him now. But they could see the resentment burning in his eyes as well as if he was close to attack Blackbeard as well. Luffy followed after him, with Blackbeard walking in the other way, mirroring how they left each other back on Jaya. I gotta say, this is just getting to be downright painful to watch, Frankie said intensely. Well, get used to it, Zoro said, walking along with Luffy, who looked ready to bite off the head of the next poor fool to bug him. Because it's only gonna get worse from here on out. I'm more worried about who Luffy's gonna fight next, Usopp said nervously. He hated seeing him like this, it must be hell inside his own head. Good thing that he has something to vent on, Robin offered as they headed towards the stairs again, only to see that their escape group had stopped dead. It turned out that it was the Minotaurus back and looking ready to fight again. Aside from thick bandages around his head, he didn't look any the worse for the wear after his fight with Luffy and the others from before. Oh, the poor guy, Frankie winced, knowing that he wasn't going to stand a chance here this time. He's in for a world of hurt, Usopp whispered, as the Minotaurus roared angrily at them, about to use his club to take them out. As the prisoners and the newcomers froze, not sure of how to get through, it was Luffy who marched forward, his face like a storm cloud. He marched straight up to the Minotaurus, as Brook looked ready to go out and try and calm him down until Zoro put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't," Zoro said in warning. "Even if we were there, we couldn't stop him now. I think that it's good for him, really." He wasn't the only one who thought that way, for as Luffy calmly walked up to the creature, some of the newcomers tried to warn him, and Bon Clay looking like he was about to run in and help, but it was Jinbei who held him back. "Wait," Jinbei said to him, "we shouldn't get in his way right now." "Hey, what do you mean by, get in his way?" Bon Clay demanded. "I was. He picked the wrong time to pick a fight with Luffy," Robin said, and she had to say that the look on Luffy's face was quite disarming. "Move," Luffy said. Though he didn't sound angry, he spoke in a tone that clearly meant that this was the only warning that thing was going to get. The Minotaurus looked down at Luffy, as if trying to remember something, but then there was anger and recognition in its beady eyes, as if it recognized that it was Luffy who had taken him out before. With a roar, the beast slammed his club right over Luffy's head, but Luffy stood his ground as he shook angrily. Luffy's eyes burned hotter than ever as he shifted back into his second gear and slammed his fist right in the Minotaurus's gut. And the next thing that anyone knew was that he was then sent zooming off right through the doorway and crashed into a wall, stuck so deeply in it that they knew that even something that tough is going to be out cold longer than a few minutes. They stared at Luffy, who was shaking violently before he screamed out, "Ace." Hope that made him feel a little better at least, Zoro said as Luffy panted hard for air, their pathway cleared enough for them to start running straight up. The prisoners and the newcomers stared in amazement at Luffy's strength before Bon Clay got them all excited by reminding them that this was their path out of hell and now was their chance. With a cheer, they all ended up bolting up for the stairs as fast as they could. Like they had thought, the way up was much longer than the way down, and they felt that they had to be running for several long minutes, wondering how long it would take before they were able to get to level 3. They kept their eyes mostly on Luffy, and though he still looked angry, he looked a little calmer after venting some of that frustration. But they had to hurry up and escape before Straw roared a voice directly below them, and they all felt the color drain from their faces as they looked back behind them, that voice full of rage and hatred. "Looks like Magellan finally caught up to level 4, Sanji cursed under his breath. "And he sounds pissed," Frankie said, understanding somewhat. He remembered when he first got back to his house to see that it was destroyed and all his men lying around injured. He had a pretty good idea to how Magellan felt when he saw Hannibal and the rest of his men out cold like that. "Who's that?" they heard someone cry out in terror. "Is that Magellan's voice?" "Well, I can't think of anyone but the boss of hell who would be this angry at the moment," Brook said worriedly. "He's at the bottom of the stairs. If he catches us, we're finished." One of the other prisoners screamed. Magellan's voice suddenly rang out again, "I will never let you get away." Chopper gulped as his eyes widened in fear. "He's after Luffy here, isn't he?" "Who else?" Robin asked as they all continued to run and ended up racing as fast as they could up the stairs as Luffy looked back, his own eyes wide. "The poison guy," he cried, and the entire place seemed to shake and they all felt sick at the heart knowing what that thing was this time. "So, if that Hydra hits Luffy one more time then he's finished, right?" Frankie asked Chopper quickly. "Even if he has a really hit tolerance to poison, it doesn't mean that he still can't die from it if it's still potent enough," Chopper said. "I don't know how deadly he can make that poison, but I'd rather not find out." "Yeah, I'm with you there," Usopp agreed, shaking a little from the menace that was in Magellan's voice. He didn't care how long or how hard he had to run so long as he could get away from having to see Magellan again. He doesn't care if he has to kill everyone else to get at him, Robin frowned. All this happened because Luffy was able to sneak in here, and he wants to make him pay for all that he's done. Run Luffy-san," Brook cried out as the escape team all began to run harder and faster than ever before. Even people like Crocodile, Mr. One, and even Jinbei were all looking apprehensive about their pursuer. "But, wait, what about Blackbeard and his crew?" Nami suddenly cried out as the shaking around grew worse, and they knew that Magellan must have been climbing the stairs right after them. "You think that maybe because he's a warlord, Magellan let them go?" Chopper asked. "He pretty much gave up his title of warlord when he came here," Robin said, shaking her head. "The most logical explanation that I can think of is that either Magellan reached the stairs without running into them or simply took them out." "Took them out?" Frankie yelled, as several of the prisoners cried out in fear as the smell of what seemed to be burning rock was slowly reaching their noses. The Hydra was there all right, and it was coating everything it touched in poison as it was trying to race up after them. But that guy was able to take out Ace. Blackbeard could fight him without worrying about being poisoned, right? "Only if he's touching him," Robin cried out, "and Magellan doesn't need to touch someone for his poison to finish you off." "I don't know. We can't see what's going on below us here, but we'll worry about that another time." Our biggest concern is to see if Luffy's able to escape with everyone in one piece. If nothing else, he could have at least incapacitated Blackbeard and his crew. As we've seen, it's not impossible to survive the poison. A lot of them were looking deeply confused as to all that, but no one could say that they wouldn't have secretly been glad that someone knocked that pompous bastard down if he had been poisoned. Up and up they ran, with the sound of the gloopy Hydra right on their tails, until at long last they ended up bursting right through a doorway right into level 3. The Straw Hats were actually glad to see this hell again, glad to be rid of the last 2 floors, and were already racing to find the stairs that would take them up to level 2. But as they raced across the sand-covered floor, the Hydra had finally caught up to them. A few of them screamed in terror at the forms of the Hydra heads bursting out from the floor, continuing to give chase. Onwards they were forced to run without looking back as the Hydra heads finally managed to catch hold of some of the escaping prisoners, stopping them in their tracks. No, it got them. Usopp cried out as the prisoners all dropped in mid-run, covered in poison and letting out screams of agony. Luffy looked behind them at the twin heads continuing to catch more and more prisoners. He looked on in horror, as if he wanted to go back and help them, but it was Bon Clay who spotted the look on his face and guessed what he was thinking. "Straw Hat," he cried as he continued to prance along. "Don't look back, just keep running." But Chopper began as Zoro looked down at him and solemnly shook his head. It was their choice to make a break for their freedom. They only gave them that chance, he said. There's nothing that can be done to help them. If we want Luffy to make it out of this mess alive, then they have to keep going. But that's, Usopp began, yet he knew that he was right. As harsh as it was, the fact was that he wanted Luffy to live and make it out of this. He shut his eyes respectfully of all those who fell behind them, but even if there was time, there was nothing they could do for those people, was there? After seeing Luffy lose so badly against Magellan, he couldn't stand the thought of seeing that ever again. And so they ran on as hard as they could, reaching the stairs upwards in a surprisingly short amount of time. Inazuma and the female Ivankov both stopped at the foot of the stairs, calling their escape team over. Everyone bolted up the steps and right past them as they began the long climb to level 2. "It's exciting if nothing else," Robin stated as she felt her blood pumping hard and fast as she looked up, wondering how long it would take for them to reach the next level. "Hey," Sanji suddenly called, looking behind them. "Not that I'm complaining, but where's the Hydra? Wasn't on our asses a second ago." They all looked down the stairs behind them and they realized that he was right. The Hydra should have caught up with them by now, but not only did they not see the thing chasing them anymore, but the shaking, that had been terrible just a moment ago, just faded. "Well, something tells me that it's not very likely that Magellan gave up the chase," Nami shouted. "Something big must have stopped him," Zoro said, trying to figure out what it was, but they were just forced to keep on running, unable to stop long enough to come up with any more ideas. After an agonizing long run up the stairs they ended up back in the maze like level 2, and their spirits slowly began to lift. Maybe there was a chance that they could get out of this place after all. All that was left was level 1, and if they could end up getting through that into the front doors, there were all those battleships waiting for them to take one and leave this hellhole behind them. But first was the challenge of getting through all these accursed beasts. Not that it was much trouble for a great number of them anyway. There was hardly any guards here. In fact, while they ran through the hallways and up more stairs, trying to find the right way to level 1, they noticed that the cells were all empty. "What's happening here?" Usopp asked, looking at the cells they passed as some of the weaker beasts on this floor ran from the mob. "How come everything's empty here? Call me crazy, but wasn't this place full of prisoners when we were last here?" Robin looked around at the mess that this floor was in. "If I had to guess, after the Sphinx was taken out, then the prisoners tried to escape themselves. But I doubt that they could have made it far, and that was almost an entire day ago. Unless Magellan decided to just take care of them all in his own way." "What?" Chopper cried out. "You think he killed them? If they were causing enough trouble, I don't see reason why he wouldn't," Zoro said, his one eye noticing the clear traces of some kind of riot that had gone down here not too long ago. And he could even almost smell traces of poison in the air. So if he had to guess, Magellan had executed some people at the very least. Before he could voice these opinions, however, they heard an echoing bashing sound behind them, as if something big and heavy fell below them. They all looked back, trying to see what had caused it, but were too far away to notice anything. "What was that?" Brook cried out in worry, wondering what Magellan could be doing now. But that was when the manticores came running from the shadows, attacking the closest person they saw. Luffy kicked away as many as he could as things were quickly starting to grow desperate for them. Their allies were all dropping like flies as they continued upwards, and they knew that by the time that they got up to the first level, they were going to be down to lower numbers. The more sensitive of the Straw Hats couldn't stand to see any of this happening, watching all these prisoners fall in droves. One of the manticores launched itself at Luffy, who kicked it away before he looked behind them in the direction of the stairs. "That's weird, the poison guy was right behind us a second ago," he panted hard as Bon Clay took out several more of the animals around them. And it was him who gave them the answer as to what was slowing down Magellan. Eva and Inazuma stopped him at the stairway. He shouted out, dancing around so that the fangs and claws ended up missing him, and he would then kick brutally at them so that they were sent flying. You mean that he stayed behind to buy them time to get out? Nami cried out, her eyes wide. That explains why we haven't heard from him for a while, Sanji said, knowing that pervert loved to be at the center of attention. But this is terrible, Usopp yelled, and he wanted to go back and see if he was alright. He may be weird, but he did save Luffy before. We can't leave him behind. They didn't, Sanji said, a part of him a little sorry that they didn't. I know he was at Marineford as well, and he did live through it. Then he beat Magellan. Brook cried out as Chopper's jaw fell open. Hard to say, Sanji said. Now he knew better than anyone how hard that guy can hit, but even he seemed to be a little outmatched when it came to Magellan. I don't suppose that he could just turn Magellan into a girl and have her help them out. Frankie asked, remembering that guard from before. Yeah, good luck with that, Nami said doubtfully as Luffy stared at Bon Clay. Then, they're fighting the poison guy now. He cried out anxiously, let's go back. No, most of the Straw Hats cried out, not wanting Luffy anywhere near Magellan again if they could help it. There's nothing you can do, Luffy. Nami cried out, you gotta get out of there first. Besides, those two morons pull through just fine. Sanji added, just go. Bon Clay turned and yelled at him, don't you dare. If they're fighting, then that means that it's all the more important for us to keep going forward. We have to believe in the power of the miracle worker. It's true, Robin said softly, Ivankov's powers could end up saving him should he become poisoned. I don't think that they're going to die here anytime soon. Unfortunately, Sanji muttered to himself as Luffy looked angrily back at him. He had already come to see Ivankov and Inazuma as more friends, and it was one thing to leave behind all these prisoners whom he didn't know. But the idea of leaving a friend was something that went against everything that he ever did. But, they could see in his face that he knew that Bon Clay was right. He closed his eyes, as if he was truly trying to believe in Bon Clay's words before he turned and began to run once again. They all ended up running right after them once again as they quickly caught up with the rest of their escape team. They were busy taking out what remained of the guards and monsters on this floor as their way up to level 1 was clear again. Jinbei spotted Luffy and they were running side by side as he told him, there are battleships stationed outside all around the prison. If we are able to hijack one of them, then we should still have time to reach Marineford before Ace is executed. This is just like when we were planning on using that convoy ship back at Eni's lobby to escape. Frankie laughed a little at the memory. Well, the government should be more careful where they leave their toys around, Robin commented with a little giggle as Luffy nodded to what Jinbei said. Right, he said, turning his head straight forward, as if he thought that he looked hard enough, he could see his brother's face there. Just wait for me, Ace. He vowed. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Yeah, the hard part now is to get to one of those ships fast enough before Magellan gets here, Brook said, still anxious about Ivankov and Inazuma. I doubt that those two can keep him busy for much longer. Fair enough, Zoro said in agreement. And I doubt that the Marines will be handing their ship over anytime soon. Thankfully, we got some people here who aren't the kind who take the answer. No, very well, Robin said, glancing over at Crocodile's stoic face. The rest of their journey through level 2 was pretty uneventful, eventually finding a flight of stairs that would take them up and apparently past the blood-soaked forest of needles and blades. That was something that everyone was glad on hearing, and their way out of this place was almost in their sights. Up and up they ran the stairs, taking several long minutes but finally reaching level 1, their spirits soaring even higher. But what confused them all was seeing the guards already knocked out for them, and the Straw Hats couldn't help but feel concerned about this. You think Blackbeard did all this while he was making his way down here? Usopp asked. Possibly, Nami said as they ran forward with Luffy, Jinbei, and Crocodile. But maybe that could end up all being some kind of trap as well. I guess that we'll see soon enough. They heard the roar of some beasts right up ahead and they recognized that from the groans of the demon guards once again. Oh, come on, those guards again. Damn it, how many times do those things have to have their asses kicked before they stay down? Frankie demanded, dreading seeing the Minotaurus and the others again. However, they were given quite a surprise when they did end up bursting through to level 1. It turns out that they weren't alone, for the place was filled with escaped prisoners, with Buggy and Mr. 3 all standing there, their path blocked by the demon guards. How the hell did they get up here? Usopp cried out in shock at seeing them. I forgot all about them, Zoro said, and he sounded disappointed at seeing them both there once again. Looks like while Luffy was fighting Magellan, the two of them slipped away, Robin commented, with Luffy as their main threat. Taken care of, I guess that they didn't think of them as dangerous enough to worry about until they were able to restore order to the prison. I don't think that it would have been impossible for them to slip out and back up a few floors if they were quiet enough. I'm surprised that they were able to keep quiet with Buggy's big mouth, Zoro said darkly. I'm amazed that they were able to get up here in the first place, Sanji said, shaking his head. Well, Luffy got out of here with a hell of a lot more action going on, as well as doing it a lot faster than these two did. He supposed that luck is a fickle thing. If only there was enough luck for them all to escape now. Luffy and Jinbei ran past everyone there, heading straight for the demon guards, and they took all 4 out so easily that it was amazing to think that Luffy had such trouble with just one of them earlier. Whatever else this place did to him, it sure made him stronger in a short amount of time. Oh, come on. Usopp groaned when he saw them fight those guards. What is with these guys? What are they made of? We left all of them unconscious on level 4 not that long ago. And how they get up here anyway? No idea, Sanji said, rubbing his head in a tired way. Let's just hope that this time they stay down. Judging from those punches, Nami said, watching Luffy take out the Minotaurus and the koala as Jinbei just finished up with the zebra and the rhino, I'd say so. Hey, watch it, you croco, delay. Buggy's voice suddenly screamed, and they looked to see that Buggy and Mr. 3 were both on the floor and staring up in terror at Crocodile, who looked as if he hadn't even noticed them. B boss. Mr. 3 cried out, his eyes bursting out of his head. Looks like they ran into the wrong person, Nami smirked, a part of her, a tiny part, glad that they brought Crocodile just so that they could see this part. Huh, he asked, looking down at Mr. 3 as if he spotted something filthy on his shoe. Oh, so it's you, Mr. 3. What's a worthless piece of trash like you doing here? Cold, but you can't deny that he doesn't deserve it, Sanji said as tears flooded down Mr. 3's face before the rest of the prisoners pointed to Jinbei and Luffy, who had finished up with the guards. The prisoners were soon calling to Buggy, pointing the 2 of them out, which caused Buggy and Mr. 3 to scream in shock at seeing Luffy there alive. You know, they seem pretty surprised to see that he's not dead, Usopp said in annoyance. It is a miracle that he lived through what happened to him though, Chopper said, his eyes watering a little as he thought about how close they were to losing Luffy for good. If I had to guess, they must have heard about Luffy being poisoned by Magellan and merely put him out of their minds, Robin said, and though she was calm, there was a hint of distaste in her words. Remind me to beat their heads in when I see them next time, Frankie said, a muscle going in his head at the thought of it. Huh, Luffy asked, looking up, and they couldn't believe that he was smiling when he saw them. What a relief. So you guys are alright. He shouldn't be so happy to see them either, Usopp said sourly, having not forgiven those 2 for running out on him. At least Bon Clay cared enough to come back and did everything he could to try and save Luffy. Yet Luffy's words seemed to have a strange effect on those 2 scums. Even after all the times that they had tried to run out and leave him, despite just leaving him to die without a second though more than once, Luffy was only glad to see that they were both okay. There was some more proof to show what kind of person that Luffy was, and this seemed to be a little much for Buggy and Mr. 3. My heart. Buggy cried out as if someone had stabbed him. It hurts so much, Mr. 3 shouted as they began to cry. Doesn't he realize that they abandoned him? Nami asked, shaking her head, not sure whether to laugh or not. Yo-ho-ho-ho, that's Luffy-san for you. Brooke said fondly, he has that effect on everyone. Look how many people, even former enemies, he's brought together here. Fair enough, Zoro chuckled a little as he watched the scene as the rest of their escape team came running up to join them. Captain Buggy, one of the prisoners called, pointing over at them, prisoners and perverts just keep coming up from level 2. Perverts too, Buggy cried out in shock, what the hell? Who are you calling pervert? Bon Clay shouted as he came twirling right up to those 2 and ended up kicking Buggy and Mr. 3 over and over as he shouted, you 2, how dare you abandon us back there? Thank you, Nami cried out as they all ended up laughing, glad for even just a moment of comic relief after everything that's happened. Finally, someone is beating them up for that. If Bon Clay didn't do it, I was, Zoro promised, and he might still beat them both to a pulp later on just to vent some of this anger. But their numbers just went up once again, Robin pointed out, and there's always safety in numbers. Not that it's going to help because Magellan is focused solely on killing Luffy above everyone else. Don't say such horrible things, Robin. Chopper cried out, shaking at the thought of Magellan bearing down at Luffy with those poisonous heads. They're on level 1 though. Frankie cried out, what are they doing waiting around? They need to hurry up and get outside to one of the battleships. Robin was frowning at that, already guessing that those ships aren't there anymore. If it were her, she would have sent orders for those ships to hurry up and leave. And Magellan is a smart man, he would have thought this through and realized that their plan was to steal a ship from the start. I got a bigger question, why the hell are all these prisoners calling Buggy, Captain? Nami asked as the prisoners were all yelling at Bon Clay, demanding to know why he was attacking their savior. Really? Sanji asked, rolling his eyes. I guess they were stuck in this place for too long, Zoro said as they all had some sweat dropping as they watched the constant arguing and talking going on. The few guards that were there, making one last brave attempt to try and stop them, seemed to lose whatever resolve they had left to fight. With this large crowd, along with the powerhouses that they brought with them, against their tiny troop. Even they had to admit that they didn't stand a chance. At least until Hydra boomed an echoing voice behind them and they all felt their stomachs drop as they all turned to see the 3 Hydra heads emerging from the doorway, with Magellan slowly walking up to face them all. The look on his face was more terrible than they could remember seeing. They had seen him look mad before, but this was beyond anger, this was cold rage. His eyes were set to kill and they knew that he no longer cared how many people he had to get for if he could just get Luffy, to hell with everyone else. Hey. Brook stammered out. What about those two? Eva-san and Inazuma-san. You don't think. If they were able to beat him, do you really think that he'd be there right now? Nami cried out. You've got to be kidding me, Sanji said, shaking his head. He had fought Ivankov and even Inazuma a few times during the last 2 years and he had never been able to beat them once. How could Magellan be that strong? He's no amateur opponent, Robin commented. I'm not saying that he is. Sanji said angrily. They needed someone strong to be able to keep this place under control, Robin said, as Magellan continued to march forward as more poison dripped down from his body. So of course they would need someone as deadly as he was. What the Straw Hats feared the most, however, was how Magellan's attention was focused mostly on Luffy. Now that I am done with the pervert boss, my new priority is to take care of you. He growled dangerously. But they're both still alive though, Sanji said at once. What's the deal with these guys? Zoro asked. If you're gonna kill someone you gotta do it when you have a chance. Otherwise they'll just come straight back. You think that they would at least make sure that they're dead before they walk off? Yeah, but I doubt that Magellan had time to worry about that since he needed to try and stop the rest of this group from escaping, Nami said as she gulped and thought of all those other prisoners who fell to the ground and were writhing around in pain. She guessed that it would be easy for him to believe that they were down for the count. She looked back as Magellan continued to march towards them, and they were surprised to see that there was some blood dripping down the side of his face, showing that he didn't leave that fight unscathed. Magellan. Mr. 3 squeaked out, looking like he wanted nothing more than to shrink away to nothing as the warden approached them. No. Bon Clay shouted out, his eyes wide as if he refused to believe it. Eva, and Inazuma. They're tough bastards, Sanji said firmly. You really did meet them, right? Usopp asked him quickly, just making sure that he wasn't saying that just to make them all feel better. Hell yeah, Sanji snapped bitterly. And I wish I didn't. Believe me, those two won't die that easily. But Luffy didn't seem to be thinking like that. His eyes were wide with shock as he mouthed their names, his hands curling up and shook with anger. Just then, Magellan's words fully sunk in. Damn it, he screamed, and to their horror, he charged ahead, running past all the newcomers and prisoners who were running for the exit faster than ever. No, Luffy, Nami screamed out as Usopp tried to grab hold of him so that he could drag him to the exit if that's what it took. He yelled in terror as his hand went through his body as the others were getting ready to try and stop him themselves, at least until someone beat them to it. Bon Clay must have guessed that something like this would happen and he charged ahead, stopping him and doing his best to hold him back as Luffy tried to claw his way to Magellan. Oh, thank God, Nami gasped, falling to her knees. I really thought that he was going to start fighting him. Did he already forget what happened the last time that he fought him? The blood's gone straight to his head, Robin said, he's angry and upset. Ever since he first heard about Ace's execution, his emotions have been high. Hearing about the two people who saved him and risked everything to give him a chance to escape here to save his brother is just an effect of all his stress and frustration spilling out. He's not thinking, he's just letting his emotions take over. And that could get him killed if Bon Clay wasn't there, Zoro said with a heavy frown, understanding Luffy's way of thinking, but he couldn't go running back every time something happened. He had to escape with his life or else this would all be for nothing. You can't, Straw Hat. Bon Clay shouted, still doing his best to keep Luffy from doing something stupid. We got no choice but to keep running from Magellan. Please, Luffy, Chopper cried out tearfully. They didn't stay to fight so that you'd throw it all away. Let go of me, Bon Clay. Luffy yelled furiously, clearly not listening to reason. I'm going to kick his ass. And soon the two were busy pushing and shoving, with neither one giving up and allowing the other to get their way. Robin noticed that Jinbei was looking at Luffy with a strange look in his eye as she glanced over at him, hoping that the fishman would be able to help talk some sense into Luffy. But he then looked away as he glanced up at some guards, who were talking into a baby transponder snail, though she couldn't hear what they were saying. But she soon realized that it was Magellan that they were talking to, for he had a transponder snail in his hands and seemed to be giving them orders. The guards soon went running off, and that was when Jinbei's eyes widened in dismay, and she knew that he was thinking the same thing that she was. That their odds of escape just went down, and they were going to continue to sink if they didn't get out of here now. Oh no, he said, so that is their plan. The rest of the Straw Hats weren't paying much attention to anything that Jinbei was saying as they were trying to root for Bon Clay into dragging Luffy away if that's what it took. You almost died because of him before, remember? Bon Clay yelled at him in frustration as he slid back a few inches as Luffy was pushing himself forward. But I'm still alive, aren't I? Luffy demanded angrily. Just barely. Frankie and Chopper both screamed out just as angrily, wanting to hit him for that remark. And just because you didn't die the last time doesn't mean that you won't die if you do try to fight him again. Nami added, close to shouting herself, and Eva said so himself that you can't take in any more poison. I doubt that even he can save you if you go and waste it. Please just listen to him, Luffy-san. Brook begged, this isn't worth getting yourself killed over. Miracles are called that because they won't happen twice. Bon Clay screamed as Luffy was pushing his face back. And you shouldn't even be up and moving in the first place. Chopper added, wishing that he could just grab Luffy and give him a shot to make him sleep. After that, he was going to make sure that Luffy stayed in bed until he was satisfied that he had fully healed, even if it meant having to tie him there if that was what it took. You too. Jinbei suddenly called, getting their attention as he ran towards them, the wave of escapees still running past them all. Hurry up to the next floor. He commanded, and they could tell from his tone that they knew that there was something wrong here. Luffy wasn't paying any attention to what Jinbei said at first until he said sharply, Luffy. That finally got Luffy's attention as he looked back at him. We must hurry to the main entrance. Jinbei said as he looked back to Magellan as he added, the situation has gotten worse. We have been too focused on Magellan. Worse? How could things get any worse? Frankie demanded yelled as Usopp screamed at such a thought. They're trying to escape with the warden on their heels and they just said that things have gotten worse. Brook gasped, his jaw hitting the floor with a crash. Trust me, Robin said with a serious face. Things can always get worse. But now is not the time for bickering. Luffy, Jinbei, and the others are out of time here, there's no telling what's going to happen from here on out. Some of the escapees were now trying to shot at Magellan in a last-ditch effort to slow the warden down as Bon Clay tried one last time to get Luffy to go. Come on, let's hurry and get going, Straw Hat. He pleaded desperately, they won't be able to stop him like that. Luffy hesitated for a moment until Jinbei barked his name again and told him to hurry. At last, Luffy seemed to realize that they were right and they all started to run again, much to the Straw Hat's relief, at least until Magellan sent one of the Hydra's heads at their retreating backs, aiming straight at Luffy. LL Luffy. Usopp screamed out, his eyes wide in terror, almost bursting out of his head. Zoro and Sanji both tried to slice or burn the poison up, but their attacks ended up phasing right through, before they stared back as they saw Luffy's head turn to look at the Hydra coming at him and his eyes widen with shock. Luffy, Nami, Chopper, and Frankie all screamed out desperately just as the poison struck. The Straw Hats all felt time stop for them, unable to believe that they had all been hit like that. Nami even had tears falling from her eyes as she honestly believed the worst, at least until the poison stopped dead. It had hit something. Magellan seemed to realize this as well and stopped the attack to see what had happened and they let out cries of shock when they saw that between Luffy and Magellan happened to have been a white wall. A wall made of solid wax. Mr. 3 stopped him. Usopp cried out, his tongue zigzagging out of his head in disbelief. Of course, Robin said, her eyes brightening up. How could I not figure it out sooner? Wax. They might make it out of this after all. It's protecting them from the poison. Chopper cheered out as Brook cried out in relief. Thank goodness. I thought the worst there for a second. He gasped out. Who would have thought that Mr. 3 would come in handy after all? 3. Luffy yelled in surprise when he saw him there as the prisoners behind them cheered, crying out in amazement that Mr. 3 was able to stop Magellan's Hydra. So long as the poison doesn't touch their skin, they don't need to fear it, Robin added, but if they have some kind of coating like with wax, then that is as good as armor. Awesome. Frankie cheered out as he posed, that is a super move, right there. Mr. 3 shook his head a little, as if he couldn't believe what he was doing. That optimism of yours makes me want to puke, he said softly, before he looked up and looked at the wax wall with a determination that they had never seen before. The second I put my guard down, I started to think of you as a friend. Sheesh, I hate being indebted to others. And again, Luffy wins over even the most unlikely of people, Brook said softly, and they knew that there would be a smile on his face if he still had skin. Who would have guessed that Mr. 3 did have some guts in there? Sanji said, shaking his head in amazement. Wow, I got a completely different vibe from him. How does he do it? Usopp whispered, unable to believe this. He looked to Crocodile and Buggy, as well as former agents of Baroque Works, just, how? Luffy just seems to bring out the best of you, Robin smiled knowingly, but also amazed by seeing this change in Mr. 3's personality. If you allow it, anyway. People just gather around him. It makes me wonder now what will happen at Marineford. Zoro glanced at the scene, to Robin, and back again as he slowly began to wonder that as well. That confirms what Mihawk once said about Luffy. Over the 2 years that he trained under him, he would try again and again to get some kind of information about Luffy and the war out of him. Trying to get anything out of him was like having teeth pulled. But he did remember something that Mihawk once said, about Luffy's power. But before he could finish that thought, Magellan looked deeply ticked off by this new development as he said, I see. Wax, huh, that's right, Mr. 3 said, and for a moment he sounded as if he was back at Little Garden, and how he thought for sure that he was going to be able to win. I ate the wax fruit. I am a candleman. Your poison will never be able to pass through my steel hard wax wall. That will definitely buy them some time, Nami said, but she knew better than to hope that it will be enough to get them out of this mess. Crocodile looked over, and despite his bored expression, he looked slightly impressed by this. So, even rubbish like him is useful, he said. You never know how suitable some powers can be. Why did he allow him in Baroque works then? Usopp asked in confusion. If Crocodile thought that low of Mr. 3 and his powers, then why did he have him work under him? Crocodile only allowed him to have the title, Mr. 3 feet, because Mr. 4 was mentally slow, Robin admitted as they looked at her, otherwise he would have been ranked much lower. However, I do know that he did have a tiny amount of esteem for his plans. Though, after he let all of you escape from Little Garden, I guess that pretty much ended it for him. Yeah, and he still ended up losing to Luffy, so what does that tell him? Sanji asked, though he had to admit that he was actually glad that Mr. 3 was still here and now using his powers to help him. I guess after seeing Luffy go through so much in an attempt to save his brother, and even showing concern for them after they left him behind was what changed him, Brook offered gently. It was almost impossible, in his opinion, to hate Luffy. There was something really special about him and he felt a surge of pride in that he was his captain. He never thought that he would be able to call anyone other than Captain Yorkie his captain, but he knew that his old friend would have been pleased with his choice to follow Luffy. Now hurry up and go. Mr. 3 yelled, and he was looking close to turning tail as well. I give up quickly, you know. At least he's being honest, Robin offered as Luffy looked more excited than he had for a while. Magellan, however, was looking more irritated than ever as he sent one of the Hydra's heads to try and go around the wall at them, but Mr. 3 saw that coming by putting up another wall to block him off. This is no time to hesitate. I cannot hold him back for long. Mr. 3 warned them all as Buggy raised up a sword in understanding. Right, then we'll get going. He called before he turned to the other prisoners and added, let's go, men. Looks like we underestimated them, Brook said as he watched the prisoners cheer and went running after Buggy as he led them to the main entrance that was just above them. Were you always this good? Luffy asked, sounding impressed. Yeah, that's what I've been wondering, Frankie whistled out. Really, if this guy was this cool back at Little Garden, well, he was sure that they still would have ended up kicking his ass, but he might have made it a lot more difficult for them to pull out a victory. Yeah, as long as I am not on a hot floor. Mr. 3 admitted quickly, I want to escape too, you know. Wonder if he would have said that if he knew where they were going after this. Sanji offered. I think that he might have preferred to stay in hell. Zoro smirked, actually looking forward to seeing how they'll take the news that they were all soon going to an even worse hell than this. Luffy, we must hurry as well, Jinbei agreed with them all. Oh yeah, Luffy said, glancing at him, you said that you were going to steal a ship. I did, Jinbei answered. Then you and others should go on ahead, Luffy informed him. I'll be stopping the poison guy in the meanwhile. I mean, it's hard to steal a ship while he's chasing us. What? Most of the Straw Hats screamed in horror at such a plan. Luffy, Nami screamed, just what do they have to do to get through that thick head of yours that it's a bad idea? True, but he does make a good point, Robin pointed out. They're still in the Calm Belt, which is full of Sea Kings. Their only choice would be to steal a warship if they want even a chance to get out of here. Getting to the front door is just the first step. They need to secure a ship to sail out with, but it's going to take some time. And it's going to be hard for them to steal a ship if Magellan's on their tail, Zoro frowned, understanding what she was getting at. They have to slow him down, even if it's just for a few minutes, it just might end up saving them. But what about the poison? Brook cried out fearfully. If Mr. 3 uses his powers in just the right way, I can see that there is a chance that Luffy can fight back after all, Robin said, and from the glint in Luffy's eyes, she could tell that Luffy was thinking the same thing that she was. Jinbei though over Luffy's comment and grudgingly admitted, yes, that is true. Luffy suddenly smirked as he said, I've got an idea. No, Nami groaned, knowing how disastrous Luffy's ideas often were. She actually began to bite down on her own nails, hoping that Jinbei would talk Luffy out of it. Does it stand a chance? He asked Luffy instead, though there was some unwillingness in his tone. Yeah, Luffy said firmly, just leave it to me. Jinbei hesitated for only a moment longer before he nodded in understanding. I understand, he said, turning a little, just don't do anything reckless. Luffy, reckless? No, Frankie said sarcastically. You think that Jinbei would have realized that Luffy's middle name is reckless? Usopp moaned out as he fell forward. I mean, who other than someone crazy would break into this place? Think we should have warned him before Luffy asked him to join? Nami asked, shaking her head. If he doesn't know now, it's only gonna be a matter of time until he does, Zoro said seriously, knowing that if they were all going to Marineford then Luffy was going to continue to pull out more rash stunts. Luffy turned to Magellan, cracking his knuckles as he said optimistically, right then, 3. Let's fight together. Something tells me that wasn't what he had in mind. Robin giggled a little as Mr. 3 looked as if he had just been told to move a mountain. No, that is wrong. I have no intentions of fighting. He screamed as he wildly waved his hands around. My only intention was to guard us the best I could and run. Can't say that I'm surprised, Sanji said, and he was actually close to laughing here. Brother 3. Some of the prisoners came running up, each one carrying several cannons that they managed to steal from the guards, were staying behind to help. All it takes is one daredevil to inspire everyone to act like one, Frankie said with a laugh. Funny how that works. We all know about that well though, don't we? Nami asked as Luffy grabbed Mr. 3, without ever taking his eyes off Magellan. I got a favor to ask, he said seriously. Listen to what I'm saying. Mr. 3 yelled, but that was when Luffy told him of his plan and Mr. 3 slowly began to calm down when this plan said that he wasn't going to be the one doing the actual fighting. You think that he can do it? Chopper asked, his eyes wide. It really is rather clever, Robin smiled, looking forward to seeing this. So if the wax can protect him from the poison, then Luffy might be able to beat Magellan after all. Brook cried out at once. I wouldn't be too hopeful though, Sanji said, lighting up another cigarette. That bastard's not gonna roll over that easily. Mr. 3 thought over the request as Luffy asked, can you do that? It shouldn't be too hard, Mr. 3 admitted, suddenly much more businesslike. He was more keen on this plan if he left the fighting to someone else. Right, Luffy said, stepping forward, I'm counting on you. And do a good job here. Nami snapped, or I'm gonna kick your ass when this is over. Very well, Mr. 3 cried out as he unleashed a flood of wax from his hand, flying out and wrapping itself around Luffy's hands and feet. It formed and hardened so that the end result was that he looked like he had two large boxing gloves and cyborg feet at the end of his legs. Wow! Brook cried out as Usopp and Chopper both let out cries of amazement, their eyes shining like stars at how cool they thought Luffy looked, and you honestly expected some kind of light or symbol go be blazing right behind him as he stood there, ready to fight. Not bad, Frankie admitted as he looked over it all. Still, if I was there, I'd sure as hell be able to fight with something good in mind. You know, I bet that the General Frankie could fight that guy with no problem. Famous last words, Sanji said as the women looked on, completely unimpressed, just wondering what the deal was with boys and their toys like this. Right, if I used this, Luffy started before he looked down at his new armor and his eyes lit up as he began to drool. This is just too cool. It's perfect. Luffy, focus, please, Zoro asked, rolling his eyes as the prisoners behind them were also cheering loudly at the sight of the armor. Seriously, what is with you boys? Nami demanded, wondering just what was it about men that just went nuts at stuff like this. Now is not the time to be impressed with yourself. But it's so cool. Chopper cried out, wanting something awesome like that to wear. It's made of wax, she retorted as Mr. 3 began to shout at Luffy to pay attention to what was in front of him. But that was when Luffy actually started to cry, trying to wipe his tears away as he turned his head to thank him for making him look so awesome, which resulted in Mr. 3 shouting for him that he didn't care about that and just wanted him to hurry up and fight. Magellan looked more irritated than ever before. Straw Hat, he said, bringing their situation back to how serious things were. If nothing else, I must praise your tenacity. Luffy turned back to face him, having wiped his tears away, and was now demanding to know what happened to Eva and Inazuma. Oh, Magellan asked, you mean Ivankov? I executed him, of course. Liar, Sanji yelled out, I bet you're just saying that to make him upset. Robin personally doubted that, but she didn't bring herself to speak that out loud as Magellan slowly formed several more Hydra heads until the three-headed beast was back. Don't worry, Magellan said coldly, I will send you to see him shortly. Here it comes, Mr. 3 warned as Luffy charged ahead. Zoro's hands clenched hard as he folded his arms, determined not to appear worried, but he couldn't bring himself to stop as he stared ahead. This was it, the moment of truth. 3. Luffy yelled. Leave it to me. Mr. 3 shouted out in understanding as he formed a large wax wall to protect them, even taunting Magellan a little as Luffy jumped over the wall and almost flew at the warden. The Straw Hats all held their breaths as they saw Magellan shoot the heads at Luffy falling at him. Luffy narrowly avoided them, careful not to get a single drop on him as he kept going straight at his enemy. Gum gum, he began as he threw his arm back, twisting around before he brought it crashing right back with a champion rifle. And he hit Magellan straight on, but unlike last time, Luffy wasn't writhing around in pain from the attack. On the contrary, he was full of life and there was a bright smile on his face as Magellan doubled over in pain as he was actually sent back a few feet, glaring with eyes full of hatred. He hit him. Chopper cheered out ecstatically. Alright, I can touch him now. Luffy cheered out, just as excitedly with the knowledge that he had a fighting chance. Thank goodness. Brook gasped out in relief. Yeah, now take him out, Luffy. Usopp cheered, wanting to see Magellan get some payback for before. This is great. Nami cried out, a smile back on her face, but soon faded when she looked over at Robin, expecting to see her smiling as well. But there was a concerned frown there instead, and Nami felt her own smile slowly fade away as she looked at her. Robin, Luffy can touch him now, Robin said seriously, but I wouldn't get too ahead of myself here. Magellan is dangerous with or without his powers. Luffy has a better chance than he had before, but this fight is nowhere near for Luffy to be guaranteed a victory here. The others slowly felt fear sink back in them as they looked back to the scene. This isn't going to be easy, Robin said seriously. Thanks a lot for that, Robin, Usopp muttered grimly as they were back to feeling tense. Make no mistake, she added lightly, even if Luffy can't defeat him, he did end up escaping with everyone. So he did what he needed to do. Let's just believe in him. Right, Brooks said confidently, there's no problem there. The prisoners all stood back a ways, their cannons ready to fire as Mr. 3 formed another strong wax wall around them so that they were all protected as well. They soon fired, with the prisoners all looked particularly eager for a chance to attack the warden. But Robin was right, Magellan was far from being defeated. He used his Hydra heads to swallow up the cannonballs, protecting himself from the attack, but he wasn't paying much attention to them. His complete attention was focused on killing Luffy here. Even after I beat you so badly last time, you still intend to fight me? He demanded, and maybe they were imagining it, but mixed in with the hatred and outrage, there was a suggestion of curiosity in his voice. Luffy jumped up into the air. I already forgot about that, he declared as he sent his hands crashing against him. The two stood their ground, refusing to move until the force of the attack sent them both back several yards. Shouldn't have said that, Zoro said, knowing that Magellan didn't need any more reasons to want to kill Luffy. That's like saying that he's weak and that their fight wasn't worth his time. He was right, for Magellan seemed to take great offense to that comment. If he wasn't aiming to kill Luffy before, he sure was now. In that case, he hissed, his eyes burning with fury. I'll make sure you never forget it again. I will carve it into your very soul. The way that he said it, it was full of loathing, and they felt the coldness in the air as he sent more of the Hydra heads right at Luffy. Luffy switched to his Gatling gun and they felt elated to see his punches go right through the head and struck Magellan head on. He had to have been hit dozens of hits all at once, but refused to fall. Like Hannibal, he was putting his life on the line and was risking everything for this last chance to stop them. He stood tall, but the attack had clearly taken a toll on his body as he fell to his knees, the poison covering his body slowly fading away. How's that? Luffy asked with a huge grin. Don't get cocky, Luffy, Robin warned. Your hands and legs are protected, but he could still end up splashing you with that stuff if you're not careful. But when he can't poison people, he doesn't seem as strong as I thought he would be, Brooke offered. Like I said, she went on, glancing over at him, physically, he's not as strong as an admiral, his powers are usually enough to render the enemy helpless. But he is still a force to be reckoned with. It's only going to be a matter of time before he starts to resort to more drastic attacks. How deadly those are, that's anyone's guess. They had been afraid that she was going to say that, for even though Magellan's composure remained calm, they could almost sense that there was something coming right up for them. The prisoners, however, seemed confident that they were going to win, declaring that he was helpless now and that they could finish him off. They began to fire again, the cannonballs aimed right at him. But unlike last time, Magellan faced those attacks before the onslaught filled the entire hall with smoke, making it impossible to see clearly. It seemed too good to be true to think that it was over as the attack went on until the prisoners had run completely out of things to fire. They were all smiling confidently, just waiting for the smoke to clear to show the outcome. But Luffy was the only one who wasn't smiling as he glared at the smoke. He seemed to sense it as well, that there was something coming, something big, though he didn't know what it was. They watched, no one brave enough to break the silence before they heard Magellan's voice speak out, almost echoing around them as his form appeared through the smolder. Let us put an end to this pointless stalling, his voice dark and dangerous as they watched him slowly get up and start to walk towards them again. I have already ordered all the battleships to leave Impel Down. The battleship you were planning on stealing is already gone. I was afraid of that, Robin frowned as the others felt their eyes wide in horror. He was actually stalling them here was he gave the orders for the ships to leave. Damn, then how are they supposed to escape? Frankie yelled out, his own eyes bursting out of his head. Yet Luffy didn't seem all that concerned as he glared back at him. That old fishman guy went to steal one of those battleships. He declared, they'll find a way to do it. Oh, that's right, Usopp sighed in relief. Jinbei can go after them, can't he? If the warships were ordered to leave not long ago, then he shouldn't have any problem catching up to them, Sanji said with a nod. Luffy's already got a lot of faith in him even though he doesn't even know Jinbei's name, Nami said with a smile. He's proven himself to be one of Luffy's greatest allies here, Zoro said knowingly. And he knows him to be Ace's friend. That's all that he needs to know, Luffy trusts him. And it's good to know that trust isn't misplaced. Jinbei, huh? Magellan asked, then it's all the more important that I finish this quickly. They spotted Magellan's face through the smoke before he brushed it all away as if pulling off a sheet to see that he was still ready to fight. Damn, he's tougher than he looks, Frankie growled angrily. All that, and he barely has a scratch, Nami whispered in terror. Not quite, Zoro said, seeing the air of desperation in Magellan's eyes. He's been pushed to his limit here, and like Robin said, here comes his last resort. And just then, Magellan's eyes burned a dark red color as poison started to seep from his body once again. Yet it was different this time. Instead of the purple, it had become a dark crimson color, bubbling across his entire body, and soon he looked as if he was glowing red. What is he doing? Usopp croaked out, stepping back as fear seemed to grab hold of him. This guy, he wasn't normal. None of them were completely sure what he was doing, though Chopper's eyes were slowly widening in horror as he had a guess to what this meant. And when he saw Luffy going in once more, he screamed, "Luffy! Don't! What's wrong?" Nami cried out, knowing that Chopper's reaction couldn't mean anything good. He didn't answer her, but he wasn't the only one here. For Mr. 3 started to panic, jumping back and shouting out, "Oh no! Oh no! Run away, Straw Hat!" Luffy didn't listen as he spun and kicked out, with Magellan holding up his arm to block. The attack hit, but they saw the wax foot slip several inches into the poison, and they actually saw it starting to hiss and foam. "It's no good," Mr. 3 cried, "my wax powers won't work against him now." "What? Why not?" Usopp screamed out, jumping up and down in panic as well. "It worked before. Because this poison is in another league." Chopper cried out, twisting his face around with his hooves violently. "I've studied about poisons, but this stuff is more than deadly. It's now even stronger than ever before. One drop will kill you in minutes. It's like acid now." "What did you say?" Nami and Usopp screamed as the others were all looking up in horror as Luffy jumped away, the wax foot still covered with poison. Yet, they saw it slowly creeping up the wax, almost like it was alive, and it was only going to be a matter of seconds before it reached Luffy's skin. But thankfully, Mr. 3 had his hair burn like a candle before he set another flood of wax to surround Luffy's feet, and as soon as it connected with it, the wax armor melted off, along with the poison. Luffy jumped out and landed back, panting hard as they all felt their hearts beat a little faster. That was close. Luffy cried out, and they didn't realize how right he was until they saw that the poison hadn't stopped spreading. It quickly spread across the rest of the wax, turning it a dark crimson color before it began to smoke. By then Magellan slowly started to look like he was melting as the stuff began to seep over and soon covered the floor and spread over everything that it touched like some kind of disease. A noxious smoke began to rise up, filling the air as the poison blacked the floor as if burning it. The pillars, the stone walls around them actually started to melt as if they were one of Mr. 3's statues on level 4. Venom Demon. Magellan raised up his arm, the poison leaving his body for a moment before his eyes glowed blood red and he let out an inhuman, almost demonic roar. That was when he began to call the poison back to him, drawing it in as he had it pile up around him. It coated his body and hid him from view as it bubbled over and over. His wings and arms burst out of the side. The face, though, was the worst of all. It was in the form of a skull, dripping with death as it looked down at them all. And that was when Magellan reappeared as if stepping through water. Luffy just gaped at what he saw, fear all over his face at what he was facing now, and they knew that he no longer stood a ghost of a chance of winning. All he could do now was run and hope that the escape ship was ready. Brook along with the weakling trio all screamed so loudly that tears burst from their eyes and they started to run, turning and ran with Luffy and the prisoners as fast as they could, no longer caring what happened so long as they could put enough distance between them and Magellan as possible. The other four stayed long enough to see that Magellan moved his arms, the poison-shaped demon mimicking his moves like a puppet as it gave chase. Hell's Judgment. Magellan bellowed out. "It's a demon." Usopp cried as he ran, tears flooding down his face. "He's the devil. The actual devil himself." Frankie was too stunned for words, looking like he was about to choke from what he was seeing, and Zoro actually had to slug him in the face to get him to start moving along with the rest of them. Though they were in no danger here, they had to get going as well if they wanted to see the rest of what happened. "This place is the entrance to hell, isn't it?" Brook cried out, hugging Chopper as tightly as he could as the reindeer sobbed in his arms. The rest of them felt true fear for Luffy as the being glided along after them. Just one drop would kill him for sure, and they were at the back of the escape group now. Magellan stretched out his puppet's hand, and reached for them. Luffy spotted this at the last second, grabbing hold of Mr. 3 and leapt up into the air, missing it just in time. Others weren't that lucky. They were covered with the poison and they died where they stood, reaching out for help, begging to be taken with them. But just one touch from them was enough to kill others. The poison spread, coating their body in seconds and they fell in agony, some dead before they even hit the floor. This place was truly hell now, they could see that. There was no hope for them as Magellan left death in his wake. Chopper looked back, tears continued to fall before he buried his face in Brook's coat, unable to bear it any longer. He wanted to help, but even if he was there, these people were past saving. Nami had to cover her ears from all the dying cries of pain as she also felt tears burn. "Luffy," she thought desperately. "Please hurry." "What a way to go," Sanji hissed, and he was looking like he was about to be sick from seeing all this as more people continued to fall. At this rate, there wouldn't be anyone left, and judging by how easily it was melting the stone here, it might end up destroying all of Impel Down. Though, if he had to be honest, a part of him hoped for that. This place deserved to be destroyed. "What's happening now?" Luffy suddenly shouted and they looked to see him looking at Mr. 3. Mr. 3 was suddenly crying out to Luffy, "It doesn't matter if it's wax or stone anymore. The poison keeps spreading like an infection. Damn it, now the wax was armor is completely useless." Luffy shouted, and he looked close to panicking as well as they reached the final stairs that would take them to the entrance. If they could just make it up there and to the door, everything will be decided in a matter of minutes. Zoro stated, his teeth grinding together so hard that he was sure that he cracked a tooth or two. Magellan can't be stopped here, and the only chance they had to live was if they made it onto that ship. He wasn't normally one for running from a foe, but what could you do here? If Jinbei didn't steal that ship in time, then they were all history. Hurry, hurry, Luffy chanted, he's right behind us. At last they managed to make it to the final hallway. They recognized it from where they first arrived at the prison. Their exit was just in arm's reach, though out of the group that stayed behind to stall Magellan, there was hardly any of them left. Hey, guys, are you there? Luffy screamed out suddenly, hoping that someone was there. That's Straw Hat's voice, called Bon Clay's voice not too far away. They're still there, Frankie yelled, his eyes wide. Damn, did that mean that they still don't have a way to escape? And Magellan is right on their heels. What are they gonna do? At this rate the only chance they have to escape is to jump into Sea King-infested waters. Luffy turned around the last corner wildly and they saw that the group was standing right there in the front doors, waiting for them. We gotta run, Luffy shouted as Magellan ended up crashing right through the wall behind them and the prisoners all screamed in horror at the sight of his demon form. It melted the wall as it slowly pushed itself through, gazing down at them with sightless eyes. We got a warship yet? Luffy screamed as they ran towards them. Straw Hat, we're still waiting for a ship to get on. Bon Clay cried back, you have got to be kidding me. Nami cried out, feeling close to screaming in frustration. They're out of time. What? Luffy yelled in disbelief, not knowing what else to do but continue to run. The Straw Hats couldn't see any way out of this now. They had run out of time, the devil was only yards away, and there was no place to go. If there was ever a time that they needed a miracle, now would be it. As if someone heard their pleas, the floor beneath them began to shake and crack apart. They looked down, as if some kind of volcano was about to come bursting out. But a second later, a big purple afro came bursting out from beneath them. What is that? Usopp screamed in shock, before he realized who it was. It was Ivankov. His head had grown to large sizes again, and he had blood dripping from his mouth and nose as he landed hard on the floor, with Inazuma under one arm and dripping with a coating of poison. They crashed up through the floor right behind the escape group and landed hard, with Eva sporting a large lump on the back of his head. They're alive, Brook cried out in relief, thank goodness. Yeah, but they might not be for much longer. Zoro shouted out, looking back, and they saw that Magellan was so shocked by this that he stopped for just a moment. Yet he was quickly shaking himself from this state, getting ready to come towards them once again. What a surprise, the group shouted out. Eva coughed and seemed to be having trouble trying to just stay awake. It seems we made it, in time, he choked out before his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he passed out. Don't faint on us now. Nami cried out furiously as Bon Clay cried in relief at seeing them both still alive, the newcomers cheering behind him. That's nice and all, but you're all still gonna die if you don't find a way to get out now. Frankie yelled, staring out at the foggy sea where he could just make out the forms of ships in the distance. Damn, they were so close to freedom, if they could only get to a ship. Straw Hat, a prisoner suddenly shouted, and they looked up to see some holding a baby transponder snail in his hands. It's from Jinbei, and he then tossed it over to him. Please, let it be some good news for once. Usopp cried out as Luffy caught it. Luffy-kun, so you made it? Jinbei's voice asked. I'm here, Luffy yelled back, but he's still chasing us though. We're going to hit a dead end at the exit. Yeah, so do something here, Jinbei. Sanji shouted out furiously. However, even with the ship it was going to take some time for them to turn around and come back for them, and that was time they didn't have. Forgive me, Jinbei told him. We've stolen a ship, but we are too far away from you. What? Brook cried out in panic. Then what are they gonna do? How did Luffy go through all this and come out in one piece? Sanji whispered, shaking his head. It was just one close call after another. And who knows how much worse it was going to get, because they still haven't even reached Marineford yet. He didn't know how much more he could take of this. But do not stop moving. Jinbei suddenly encouraged, jump straight into the sea. Get everyone to throw themselves into the ocean. Into the sea, Chopper cried out anxiously. But Luffy'll sink, and there's sea kings there. I rather risk drowning than deal with that guy. Usopp shouted, pointing back to Magellan. If Jinbei says to jump, then they just have to trust him. Nami said firmly. She was sure that he had something up his sleeve, he hadn't let them down yet. What are you saying, Jinbei? The prisoners were all crying out, fear all over their faces. We're in the middle of the calm belt, ya know. But Jinbei ignored their cries as he spoke directly to Luffy, you can leave the rest to me. Luffy's face hardened in understanding as he skidded to a stop, turning back to face Magellan as he commanded to the others, do what he says. What? Mr. 3 shouted out as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You heard him, Usopp yelled, though he still didn't know what Jinbei had planned, it was their best, last shot. Jump into the ocean. 3, come help me one last time. Luffy yelled, glaring back at Magellan, ready for the final round. Are you insane? Mr. 3 hollered, jumping up and down and flailing his arms as if he could already imagine drowning. If we leap into the ocean, we are done for sure. He works for the government. He is not worthy of our trust. That damn fishman bastard. Well, what do you suggest that's better? Zoro asked. He's Ace's friend, Luffy said, and they knew that was all that he needed to know. I trust him. Mr. 3 stared at him, and it was impossible to tell if he was amazed by his conviction or thought that he was crazy. But there was no time to think about it, for Magellan spoke up. To the sea, he asked, and he was practically gliding along the ground as the venom demon continued to make its way towards them. If you think you can, then just try to get away. The moment you touch the water, you will be in the Sea King's nest. He may regret saying that in a minute, Frankie said, as they knew if they didn't get away in the next 60 seconds, then they were all screwed. Be careful. Do not let even a drop of the poison touch you. Mr. 3 warned the rest of the escapees, who looked ready to dive into the sea at any moment. They turned, screaming the whole time as they bolted straight for the dock right outside. Magellan had reached them, holding up the venom demon's giant hand, ready to crush them all. They held their breath, hoping that Luffy hadn't run out of creativity just yet as he put his thumb up to his mouth. Third gear, he said as Mr. 3 held up his hands. This is a special service. He cried out as wax burst forth from his body, spilling forward so that a massive wall of wax blocked off Magellan and the entire hallway from view. The Straw Hats knew that wasn't going to stop him for long. They had 30 seconds at most, if not less, before he broke that wall down. It's pointless. They heard Magellan scream from behind the wall, and they saw it buckle as he rammed the side of it, the poison quickly spreading. Come on, Luffy. Chopper screamed out at the top of his lungs. You can do it. Brook added, terror gripping his bones, and he thought for sure that he had lost several years of his own life from just watching this. If he hadn't already died before, the suspense was going to do that. But he wasn't even thinking of a skull joke now as Mr. 3 cried out desperately to Luffy to hurry up, his body shaking with the effort just to keep standing. Luffy blew the air into his arm, quickly moving it from his chest to his leg, causing it to grow out to giant size. Magellan hit the wall a second time, and it almost broke through as Mr. 3 yelled, I can't hold it any longer. Just a second more. Frankie yelled, his eyes wide as he understood what the plan was. Luffy swung his leg around and kicked forward. Gum gum, giant stomp. And he hit the wall at full force, Mr. 3 barely ducking out of the way as the wax cracked and pieces went flying off, but it stood long enough for Luffy to put all his strength into this one last attack. At last, he managed to win out and he kicked Magellan back, crashing him and his venom demon into the wall behind him as he hit the floor. Rubble fell down on top of him along with the destroyed wax wall as laid there. He did it. Chopper cried out, jumping up and down in amazement as the prisoners all cheered loudly at the sight of it. Did he really? Nami gasped out, not daring to hope that he was down for the count. Luffy couldn't hold on to his third gear anymore and went flying back like a balloon, his body shrinking the whole time, until he landed right on top of Ivankov's giant afro. No, look, Zoro yelled and pointed as the poison was sweeping around the wax, swallowing it up as it melted away. What the hell? What is this guy? Frankie screamed out, backing away. What did they have to do to keep this bastard down? It bought them a little extra time, Robin said loudly, but not a lot of it. It won't take him long to reform that poison demon. And I doubt that attack will work again. They need to jump now. Why do you have to be such a grim prophet? Usopp cried as the venom demon was reforming as they spoke, the skull face seemed to be radiating with Magellan's deep rage. While that was happening, Luffy was trying to wake Eva up, jumping up and down in his shrunken form and squeaked out for him to snap out of it. It took a few seconds but Eva's eyes slowly rolled back and he looked drowsily over at Luffy, struggling to focus. What? Eva muttered, and they could see that he was still half asleep. We have to hurry, Luffy screamed, still jumping up and down. Use that move of yours. Wait, Nami said, going pale as it hit her what Luffy was thinking. He's not. I think he is, Sanji said as Ivankov slurred out nonsense. He must have hit his head harder than they thought, and Luffy's tiny form wasn't helping. This is gonna be one hell of a ride. The wink, Luffy shouted. Okay, then, Ivankov stated, and they weren't sure if it was because he understood or was just doing it because he was told to. Hey, you can't be serious. One of the newcomers shouted, if you do that then. Here we go, Ivankov called, opening one of his eyes as wide as he could as the others were screaming for him to hold on for a moment. They were gonna go flying out of here one way or another. Magellan was back on his feet and was continuing to make straight towards them. Your plan is pointless, he declared menacingly. If you enter the sea without a ship, there is no hope for you. I'll take my chances out there than stay here. Usopp shouted as Luffy grew back to his regular size, and then began to bark orders at the others to grab onto Ivankov's face. Not that they needed much convincing, since Magellan had just declared that he was not going to let them escape by this point, and so they climbed up onto Eva's hair and hung on tight. Let's go, Usopp shouted, desperate to know how this whole thing ended up, and they also jumped up to ride along with them, feeling stupid sitting up on the face of a drag queen. You know, Robin said, gazing up at Magellan's outstretched hand, now almost directly on top of them. If I didn't know better, I would swear that Luffy had this all planned from the start. That's what it seems like, doesn't it? Zoro asked, wondering just how his crazy plans just kept working one after another since coming here. Hell, wink, Ivankov shouted out as he blinked down and a giant blast of air, made even greater thanks to his giant head, burst out. It stopped Magellan's demon in its tracks for a fraction of a second, and they could see him struggling to move forward to reach them. Slowly they skidded across the floor before they finally shot out, Magellan's demonic hand still trying to reach out to them, trying to pull them back into the mouth of hell. They flew through the air, crashing right through the archway that was over the entrance and out onto the sea. And I thought us leaving Enies lobby left a lasting impression. Frankie shouted out, and he was laughing again, his spirits soaring at how they were finally out of that place and back on the ocean where they belonged. Zoro didn't answer as he also felt a smile come to his face when he looked back to see the stunned look of disbelief on Magellan's face as he stared after them. Luffy had come bursting into his prison and ended up escaping with all those prisoners, and there was nothing that he could do to stop them. But this last stretch to escaping Impel Down wasn't over, and he knew it as he looked to the water below them. The ship that was supposed to be their escape ship was still far off, and he didn't think that Jinbei could bring it back to them in time before they were eaten by some sea monster. Come on, Jinbei, Nami cried out, closing her eyes as to how this was going to end as the prisoners all screamed as they neared the water. What's that? Brook cried out, and he pointed to the shark-shaped shadows in the water below them. No, don't tell me they have to fight off sharks now. Usopp cried out, not wanting to believe that they escaped hell only to be eaten like this. But it was too late now as some of the prisoners were even screaming at Ivankov to start flying. They hit the water. At least they would have if something didn't come swimming up below them and they landed on something much harder than water. Luffy slipped and ended up bouncing right off Ivankov's head, and they thought, for sure, that he was heading to the sea. But instead, he ended up landing on something rubbery and firm. They discovered what they were when one of the shadows jumped out of the water. It was a whale shark. Give you one guess who called them here? Sanji beamed at the sight of the smiling shark. Jinbei. Chopper and Brook cried out in astonishment, looking back to prison to see that there was sunlight causing rainbows as the whale sharks all began to jump out the sea happily, with Magellan still standing at the entrance, and watching them leave, with nothing more that he could have done to stop them as his demons slowly melted away. It was as if they had escaped from hell itself for that moment, and suddenly they were all laughing and some of them even crying with relief that they had managed to escape. They were all free once again, and Luffy was laughing loudest of them all as he stared at the sharks in amazement. Awesome, he cried out in wonder as he actually seemed to be having fun riding his own shark. That was when they suddenly stopped and the shark that Luffy was on looked off in the direction of the fleet of battleships where they saw Jinbei standing on the side, obviously communicating to them. That was when the sharks all stopped jumping and slowly began to line up, giving them all a pathway straight to the ship. He's amazing, Luffy cried out, a big smile on his face as he looked at Jinbei in action. He really is, but I don't understand how he was able to do this though. Nami laughed herself as the whale sharks began to throw them up through the air as if they were balls, and guided them right to the stolen warship. Luffy was smiling and laughing again, looking much more like his old self as he jumped happily from one shark to the next, and even Ivankov seemed to be enjoying himself as they flew through the air. I've dealt with fishmen for years, and I can't ever remember them communicating with fish like this. Aside from Momu, that is. I've heard that the ability to speak with fish is usually unique to merfolk, Robin chuckled. But right now, I have to say that I'm not complaining, are you? Chopper, Usopp, and Brook were no longer paying attention as they were also flying through the air, laughing along with Luffy as if they were on trampolines. This was, by far, the best part of the memory that they've had for a long time. All too soon they reached the ship and crashed down onto the deck, though no one minded in the least as they all leapt up and were starting to celebrate having finally reached their escape vessel. The prisoners were all crying and bathing in the bright sunlight and cool sea breeze, much like the Moria's victims had back at Thriller Bark when they had gotten their shadows back and walked under the sun for the first time in years. Though the Straw Hats all knew what was to happen, though they knew that now the toughest memories to see were just ahead, they were able to forget that for a brief moment as they drank in the wonder feeling of freedom. We do not have time to celebrate yet. Jinbei yelled, getting them all to refocus on that they still had to escape from this water before they could even begin to think of relaxing. We have to hurry and get out of here, he called as he went straight to the wheel and spun it around expertly. And though everyone knew that he was right, they wanted to relish in their escape just for a moment longer before they got to work. Luffy was arm in arm with Buggy as he waved gratefully back to the whale sharks, that were all turning and leaving these waters as soon as they could. The others all began to run to the side of the ship and began to wave them off, crying out that they were free and thanking them from the bottom of their hearts for saving them back there. A lot of them were crying out in joy, watching Impel Down slowly fade away from their sights. A lot of men were declaring that they were never going back to that place again, that they were going to go home to their families and turn over new leaves. And, of course, Buggy had to ruin it all by looking down at them from the mast, asking them all who they had to thank for that, which the prisoners that had been with his group all cheered his name. "I think I'm gonna be sick," Zoro said, shaking his head at that. "Really, were these guys blind or something? Just what did that clown do to get them out? They should be thanking Luffy, Jinbei, and even Ivankov, anyone other than Buggy. Why didn't they leave him behind or something?" "Careful," Nami said darkly, her fun from the ride here fading as she frowned up at the red-nosed idiot. "If his ego gets any bigger he could end up sinking the ship." Sanji blew out a puff of smoke before he spotted something not far off. Ivankov was holding onto Inazuma and looking down at his friend with great concern before he ordered some of his new kamas to lay out a blanket for him. "Oi, Chopper," he said, getting their attention. "How bad is he?" Chopper, who had been laughing along with Frankie, looked to see what he was talking about and immediately went over to check on him. He crouched down next to him as Ivankov began to give orders to find the medical office and bring everything they could find here to treat him. "It's pretty bad," he said worriedly. "I mean, it's not as much as Luffy had suffered through, but if they don't get him treated fast, he could still die." "But he'll be alright, won't he?" Frankie asked in concern. "Why doesn't Eva just give him that same shot that he gave Luffy?" Usopp asked before he remembered what Luffy had been forced to go through and added, "Never mind." "You heard what he said," Chopper said grimly. "I wouldn't wish that kind of healing on anyone. And I doubt that he'll be willing to put his friend through that kind of suffering," Sanji said with a sigh. "If possible, with the right medicine here, and enough rest, I think that he might have a chance of pulling though on his own," Chopper guessed, "but it's hard to say for sure since I'm not there to really treat him. So I can't make that call here." "He pulls through," Sanji said in annoyance. "Trust me, that guy's a lot more stubborn than he looks." Suddenly, cannonballs were flying at them. One of them forced Buggy to break apart into pieces and fall onto the deck as they all remembered that they were far from safe. They had an entire fleet against them, and they were all filled with cannons, ready to be put to use. Jinbei was at the wheel and was able to steer out of most of harm's way, though he couldn't hope to avoid all of the black balls at the same time. "You think that there are really strong guys on board?" Brook asked worriedly, wondering if they would be forced to fight some really powerful Marines to escape, but that was when Jinbei answered the question for them. "Everyone ranked Vice Admiral and above has already been called to Marineford," he called to them all as he continued to steer, "but a battleship is a battleship. They are still tough, no matter who is on board." "He's right," Robin said knowingly. "Even if they aren't as dangerous as a Vice Admiral, there's a lot of them here and they are heavily armed." That was when her eyes widened in shock as she suddenly remembered something, silently cursing herself for not thinking of it before. "Robin?" Sanji asked, noticing that she seemed to have grown very pale. "What's wrong?" "The gates," she moaned out. "The gates?" Brook began in confusion as Nami gasped in shock, staring up at the sky, and there the gates of justice was seen through the mist. "We forgot all about those stupid gates." Sanji cursed out as he thought about the pain it was for him to go looking for the controls to close the gates back at Eni's lobby. "And if I have to guess, I'd say that the controls for it are back inside the prison." "No, I forgot about that," Usopp cried out in alarm. "You mean that there's no chance for them to escape now?" Brook cried out as they continued to make way for the gates. "Unless they have someone whose hand slipped and accidentally opened up the door from inside, then I don't know what to tell you," Zoro stated, biting down hard. "I forgot how big this stupid thing was," Frankie hissed, wishing that someone could tell him what was going to happen. "This is bad. These gates will never open for us." Mr. 3 screamed in despair as he gaped up at them. "Oh no," Luffy shouted out, "we made it this far and now we've hit a dead end." "I don't think so," Brook whispered as he looked over to Jinbei, one of the few people who remained calm, despite how serious things were. Buggy ran over and jumped up to grab hold of his kimono, shaking it as he yelled, "What are we gonna do, you damn shark?" "We'll break through," Jinbei answered as if it was obvious. "Great plan, how do we do that?" Sanji asked. "That's just impossible." Buggy shouted back, "This is the worst possible situation. How can you stay so calm?" Whether he was just keep silent just to piss Buggy off, they didn't know, but it certainly made Buggy close to freaking out as he screamed, "Say something." "I love how he's dealing with him," Sanji said, "but though I know that Jinbei is usually calm about most things, and as much as I love watching Buggy squirm, he's being pretty chill here." "He knows something," Nami said, knowing that look. Jinbei had a plan or something, that was the only explanation that she could think of for him to be as calm as he was here. Luffy glanced over at Jinbei, and maybe after seeing how calm he was, it helped to steady his own nerves before he turned to everyone and started to give orders. "First off, we have to protect the ship." He shouted at them all, "Don't let them sink it. Would be a bad thing if it sank before they were able to escape and drowned in the process," Robin stated. "Things are bad enough without you making them seem even worse for us, Robin." Nami yelled at her as the prisoners and newcomers all began to run around the ship, trying to do what they could to protect it as Buggy continued to flail around in pieces. Crocodile looked as if he couldn't believe that he was surrounded by such idiots and barked, "Are you just going to sit there and take their attacks? This is a battleship too, remember? Are you not going to shoot back, you worthless fools?" "Right, forgot about that," Chopper said, looking around at their own cannons. Question though, how does a battleship work? Usopp asked, wondering if he could learn how to fire back so quickly. If only I was there, Frankie cursed for what felt like the millionth time. I'm sure I could get those puppies going. Doesn't matter since they're so outnumbered, Nami said worriedly, looking at the dozen battleships continuing to head towards them. Their best chance is to just defend the ship from those cannonballs. That was going to be my suggestion. Buggy yelled in agreement to Crocodile's words. Really? Chopper asked in amazement. If it was, then I'll eat my slingshot, Usopp whispered with a shake of his head. Of all the people that they had to bring with them, why did Buggy have to be one of them? It's like opposite day here or something. Seeing Luffy joining up with all these former enemies, Frankie said as he thought about what opposite day would be like for their crew. Luffy wanting salad, Zoro and Sanji getting along. He shivered at the idea and added, man, I don't like opposite day. Let's shoot them back, men. Buggy declared as everyone got to work. The prisoners and newcomers ran around, doing everything they could to work the cannons and loading them up to fire back as best as they could, though most of them were terrible shots and ended up missing by miles. Thankfully some of them were able to defend the ship from the onslaught of cannonballs continuing to bombard them. Luffy was able to bounce them back as Crocodile and Mr. One destroyed them before they could touch the ship. They left Jinbei at the wheel, and it was obvious from how he steered that he was a true pro helmsman, and he was able to get this bulking warship to move through the water pretty smoothly despite the fact that they were under attack. A lot of them expected Ivankov to be fighting back, but they looked to see that he was still recovering from his poisoning, and Inazuma was still out cold as he was moved inside the cabin and treated as best as they could. But as time went on, a lot of them were quickly becoming discouraged, for they had reached the gate, but it was still shut and they knew that there was no way that they would be able to escape from here. Can someone tell me what they're going to do now? Brook cried out, his hands pulling anxiously on his feathered boa and starting to tear it to pieces. No matter what, I can't think of a way for them to break through that massive gate. Wait for it, Zoro said, holding on to the faint hope that Jinbei had a plan up his sleeve. Another minute went past, and then, to everyone's amazement, they saw a faint white line appear in the crack of the two doors. That was when they realized that it was opening. It's opening up for them. Nami cried out as Usopp's jaw hit the floor. But how? I don't know and I don't care. Frankie cheered. Finally. We're getting some luck here. We're finally leaving Impel Down. Chopper cheered out joyfully, having seen enough of that place to last several lifetimes and hoped to never see it again. Thank goodness, Nami sighed in relief, knowing that all they had to do was sail right on through out of here. But some of the others were frowning heavily at the door, unable to believe that it was happening. It was too good to be true that the gate was magically opening for them. Alright, I don't know why, but the gates are opening. Luffy cheered along with the rest of the newcomers, jumping for joy. Everyone on the ship was cheering as they heading right through the giant gate, escaping at long last and leaving Impel Down behind for good, everyone that is, yet. Jinbei, Nami asked, blinking at the serious expression on his face. What is it? Something's wrong, Zoro said, looking around. This didn't add up, the gates were suddenly opening on their own. This smelled of a trap to him. Was that why Jinbei didn't seem happy about it? It seemed the most reasonable answer, but his gut instincts were telling him no. Luffy, Jinbei suddenly said as Luffy was now dancing with some of the prisoners at their good fortune. Yeah, Luffy asked, looking back at him with a big smile on his face. What's up? Hey, Crocodile suddenly said nearby in his bored voice. I thought you promised him that you wouldn't say anything until after we left. Promised who? Frankie asked, looking at them with confusion. He wasn't the only one here who was lost, for the smile soon faded and Luffy was staring at the two of them in the same confused way. What is it? He asked. I know I promised, Jinbei sighed, not looking at anyone. But, I will regret it more if I don't at least give them a chance to say goodbye. Goodbye to who? Usopp demanded as it dawned on Robin what was going on. She quickly looked around, trying to find the one face that she knew wasn't here anymore. Luffy, Jinbei went on grimly. The only way to open up the gates of justice is to work the controls that are still inside Impel Down. The Marines would never have let us escape, yet they are opening for us here. The only way that would happen is if someone stayed behind to get the gate open. Luffy stared at him, it was sinking in what he was saying. Then, he began slowly. Someone had to. His eyes suddenly widened in shock as he began to stare around him, Robin shutting her own eyes as she whispered, Bon Clay. Bon Clay, Usopp shouted, his jaw falling open. You mean, he stayed behind alone? Brook cried out in horror. That idiot, Sanji gasped out, unable to say any more as he stepped back. He wanted to see that bastard jump out from the crowd and call out something stupid like, fooled you, or something like that. If that was true though, if he really did stay behind then. He chose to stay of his own free will, Jinbei told Luffy grimly. I just couldn't let us go off without at least telling you. And no, Nami choked out as she started to cry all over again. She was so sick of all this pain and hardship, how could Bon Clay do this to Luffy? Is that really true? Bon Clay? Luffy asked in disbelief, shaking his head like he didn't want to believe it. He can't be there. Brook cried out, pointing behind them in the direction of the prison. He was with them, wasn't he? At the entrance. We saw him when Magellan showed up. He must have snuck away before they were able to escape, Zoro said, his fingers clenched so tightly that his nails drew blood and he felt the hot liquid drip from his hand. We were all so focused on Magellan that it would have been hard, would it? No, they gotta go back for him. Usopp shouted out, not bearing the thought of their friend left behind with someone like Magellan. There was no way that he was going to let Bon Clay get away with this. But they were already halfway through the open gate as it was slowly beginning to close. As soon as this tiny ship passed through they would be closed entirely, and they knew that it was Bon Clay who was doing all this as well, to make sure that they wouldn't be followed. He was just with us at the exit. Luffy yelled at Jinbei, voicing what Brook had said before, and he was looking angry. Are you saying that Bon Clay stayed behind and impelled down on his own? They were all hoping that Jinbei would counter that, simply tell them that Bon Clay was just below deck or something, but he didn't. He remained silent, not even glancing at him, and that was all the proof that they needed was the truth. Even though we made it this far, even though we were almost free, Luffy screamed out furiously at him, wanting him to just say something as how they were going to go and help their friend. But when Jinbei still didn't say a word, Luffy began to shake Jinbei's sleeve, continuing to yell, the only reason we've managed to meet Eva and the others and escape from there was because Bon Clay was with us, and you're telling me we should just go without him. Tears were filling up with Brook, Nami, Chopper, Usopp, and Frankie as Luffy's words sunk in. If it wasn't for Bon Clay, then Luffy would have died inside that stupid cell and they never would have seen him again. They would have eventually gone back to the Sunny and waited there for Luffy to hurry up and return, but he would have been long gone to them, and they never would have known. BB Bon Clay. Frankie sobbed out to the heavens as he fell to his knees and cried a river of tears as the other four were quickly starting to break down too. There's still time though, Chopper shouted out, refusing to believe that Bon Clay was gone. They could still go back for him. There is no time to waste, Jinbei said firmly, and he seemed determined not to look back at Luffy's accusing words. How could you say something like that? Chopper screamed out, unable to believe that Jinbei had just said something like that. As cold as it is also true, Robin stated, looking away. If they don't leave right now then they shall all die. But, Nami cried out, not wanting to accept it. No one forced him to stay back, Zoro said, closing his eye. He chose to stay of his own free will. If they go back now, that will be throwing away his sacrifice. Sad as it was to say it, they all knew that he was right. But the thought of leaving behind a friend like that was too painful to think of. Luffy wasn't thinking of that either, but merely the fact that his friend was the only one left behind. Are you going to abandon him? Luffy shouted at Jinbei furiously before the fishman picked him up by the scruff of his neck and threw him hard on the ground. We have already abandoned countless allies who fell along the way, he said harshly as Luffy stood up, looking ready to fight. Jinbei turned his head to yell at him, do you intend to return there and fight Magellan again? Then there would be more sacrifices. We would waste more time, too. If someone had not stayed behind, the gates would have never opened for us. But why did it have to be Bon Clay? Usopp shouted out as he choked out tears, snot dribbling down his nose. How can you be surprised? Sanji asked, thinking back to Alabasta when that bastard gave up his own freedom to save them from those marines. This isn't the first time he stayed behind for our sake. Luffy, Nami whispered as Luffy's face was torn with pain and confusion. She could tell that he knew that Jinbei was right and that leaving now was their only choice, but the idea of leaving Bon Clay back there and facing what he knew went on in that place seemed to be too much for him to even think of. Yet, if they had gone back, then he and everyone else might end up dying. Change that might to a most likely, and then Luffy would have lost his one chance to save his big brother. Zoro opened up his eye as he looked behind them, impelled down nothing more than a speck in the distance. There was nothing more anyone could do for him, no matter how badly they wish it, they were simply too far away now. But he never once looked away from the shrinking prison and gave Bon Clay a silent, thank you, for all that he had done. Despite everything that happened in that place, Bon Clay more than made up for his decision to run out on Luffy when he first faced Magellan, and Zoro vowed that he was never going to forget that. But it's not fair. Chopper cried as he hugged Robin's leg, who bent down and embraced him like how a mother would. None of this is fair, she agreed, her face pressed against his hat. It's terrible that it had to happen at all. But please understand, Chopper, they never would have been able to escape from this place at all. Even if they had gone back for him, Magellan would have killed them all. Everything that Luffy and Bon Clay had sacrificed up till now would have meant nothing. Zoro's right, this was Bon Clay's choice to make and his alone. But now he is alone. Chopper howled as he buried his face into Robin's blouse. All we can do now is thank him and honor his sacrifice, Brook mumbled through a choked-up voice. We owe him so much for bringing Luffy-san back to us, one that I don't think that we can ever repay him. Most of the Straw Hats were crying as Jinbei reached into his kimono and pulled something out, holding it out to Luffy. It was a baby transponder snail, and they understood that this was their last chance to say their goodbyes. If there was anything that they wanted to say, they had to do it now. It is still connected, he said, still not looking at him as he focused on keeping them on course. The baby snail phone has a very short range. As soon as the gates close, we will lose contact with him. Luffy looked at it before he rubbed his eyes hard and took it, speaking loudly into it, Bon Clay. Hey, can you hear me, Bon Clay? Why are you doing this again, just like that last time? They had expected Bon Clay to start speaking, telling him not to worry and that he should get going. But nothing. There was no answer, and that seemed to be push Luffy to his breaking point as he cried out, weren't we supposed to escape together? You just keep saving me over and over again. The Straw Hats all gathered around the little snail as the newcomers and prisoners, the former Baroque Works agents included, listened to what was happening. The news that Bon Clay stayed behind to save them was passed around, and they were staring at the transponder snail like they couldn't think of anything to say. If you're there, then answer me, Bon Clay. Luffy pleaded into the thing, wanting some kind of proof that Bon Clay was there, but still there wasn't any word from the other end. What's wrong? Usopp wept out. Why isn't he answering? What's he doing? Bon Clay. Luffy screamed desperately, over and over, trying to get him to at least say something. Soon, the others began to start crying out to him as well. Answer us, Brother Bon. Why won't you answer? Bon Clay. Luffy screamed louder than ever as a large number of people began to burst out crying. Including, of all people, Mr. 3 and Buggy. Mr. 2. Mr. 3 shouted as tears began to fall. Even Buggy was crying. Mr. 2, he sniveled, I'm so sorry for everything. Bon boy. Eva yelled, his eyes wide with shock at hearing what was going on. A lot of them wanted to plug up their ears from hearing all this, not sure how much more of this heartbreak that they could take. But they had safely made it to the other side of the gate and the doors were now almost closed. If there was anything else that needed to be said, it had to be now. Luffy looked desperately up at the closing doors before he looked back to the snail and screamed out Bon Clay's name one last time, but still, nothing. Real men don't need words, Usopp mumbled as his lip trembled and he began to bawl openly as he looked away. But, he could at least say GG goodbye. Frankie cried out loudly, howling so loud that they almost missed Luffy's words. Bon Clay, the gates are closing, we're going, Luffy stammered out, sounding close to breaking down completely. He looked up at the sky and then he screamed out, as if hoping that Bon Clay could hear his words if he shouted them loud enough, thank you. Thank you Bon Clay. Chopper shouted out as their crying got even worse. But no one was ashamed to admit it as all the prisoners and newcomers around them also began to sob and scream out words of thank you, crying out his name. But at last, Bon Clay's words suddenly got through and took them all by surprise when they heard, Straw Hat. Luffy stared at the snail, as tears flooded its own eyes. Bon Clay, he shouted, hanging on to every word that he was about to hear. Straw Hat, you have to save your brother no matter what. He shouted out, and they could tell that he was also crying as this goodbye. At his words, tears finally fell from Luffy's eyes as well as the Straw Hats all felt as if the world was falling away from them at that last request. It was like when Luffy had begged Ivankov to save him after he found them half dead in the snow. He wasn't thinking about himself, he never did, but for his friend's safety. And now Bon Clay was giving him hope, giving him a reason to keep going and to forget about him. And in the end, they could only imagine just what kind of grief Luffy went through after unable to do so. I'm sure, you can, save your brother. Bon Clay screamed out, and for a moment they could almost see his face, the tears ruining his makeup, but conviction on his face. Bon Clay. Luffy cried out one last time as the gates closed behind them and the baby snail fell asleep, their final connection with Bon Clay now gone. Their escape ship was badly damaged and a trail of smoke floating up towards the heavens. But it was far from destroyed, more than able to sail them the rest of the way. If weren't for Bon, we'd all be chum, right now. One of the newcomers shouted as most of them ran to the side of the ship, staring at the doors and cried mournfully, shouting out Bon Clay's name. And that was how the memory faded, with all of them feeling like their spirits had been crushed as darkness returned around them. Bon Clay had given up everything to save Luffy and to protect him in their absence, and they knew that Brook was right. They owed Bon Clay more than they could ever say. Zoro was shaking hard as he felt the familiar presence behind him. If I had known what had happened while I was stuck on that stupid island, I wouldn't have stopped fighting until I got there. He declared as he turned to glare at the form that had taken shape behind them. He turned to face it as the figure towered over them with that furious, dead look that they had come to hate so much. And not a single one of them looked away in fear as they glared up at him. And now, Zoro finished up, his swords in his hands. You just gave me a good excuse to kick your ass. Do you have any last words? Slime Magellan cried out as he made towards them. Yeah, Sanji shouted, fire licking his legs. I'll see ya in hell.